Eleanor Hayes pressed the barrel of her rifle against the gate latch and did not move. On the other side stood a man she had never seen, hollow-cheeked, sunburned to the bone, barely standing. But it wasn't the man that stopped her finger from pulling the trigger. It was the little girl pressed against his leg, gripping his coat with both fists, her lips cracked white from thirst. And the small boy asleep on the dirt behind them, too exhausted to beg. Eleanor had buried her husband 3 years ago. She had promised herself she was done with hope. If this story moves you, if you know what it feels like to hold everything together alone, subscribe to this channel and follow every part of Eleanor's story to the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Eleanor Hayes had learned long ago that the land did not care whether you were grieving. The Montana plains did not pause for a widow's tears. The cattle still needed feeding before sunlight broke the ridge. The fences still split apart under frost and wind, whether a woman had slept 4 hours or none at all. The debt still sat on the kitchen table every morning, folded inside the same creased envelope, waiting with a patience that felt almost cruel. 3 years. 3 years since she had stood in the churchyard in her black dress with mud on her boots, because she had come straight from the barn, because even on the morning they buried Daniel Hayes. The horses still needed water, and she had listened to Reverend Alderman read the words over her husband's grave, and she had not cried. Not once. Not there. Because Eleanor Hayes had learned that crying was a thing you did in private, and grief was a thing you carried in your chest like a stone. You never put down, and the only way to keep moving was to not stop long enough to feel how heavy it had become. She had stayed. That was the thing people in Millhaven could never forgive her for. Every rancher's wife, within 60 miles. Every banker's daughter. Every woman who had married well and lived comfortably behind painted fences, they had all expected Eleanor to fold. To pack her husband's belongings into a trunk, sell the land to whoever offered first, and retreat back to her aunt's house in Billings, where she had been raised in relative comfort. It would have been the sensible thing. The dignified thing. The thing a woman of 30 years with no children and no foreman and no experience managing 300 acres of drought-cracked Montana range was supposed to do. Eleanor did not do the sensible thing. She walked back from her husband's grave, changed out of her dress, pulled on his old work coat, because hers wasn't warm enough, and went back to the barn. That was 3 years ago. Since then, she had patched fences with her own hands until her palms bled through her gloves. She had negotiated with suppliers in town, while men twice her age talked over her head and addressed their answers to the empty air beside her shoulder. She had ridden out alone in the dark of a January night to pull a calf from a frozen creek and carried it back across her saddle because losing one more animal meant losing ground she couldn't get back. She had sat at that kitchen table with the lamp burning low and run figures until her eyes blurred, moving money from one column to another, finding ways to stretch what little she had until the next season brought something better. Some seasons did not bring something better. But Eleanor stayed. She stayed because Daniel had believed in this land. She stayed because she had stood beside him when he drove the first fence post into the ground, and she had heard the pride in his voice, and she had felt it too, that particular pride that comes not from what you were given, but from what you built. She stayed because the moment she walked away, everything Daniel had worked for would be swallowed by someone like Victor Caldwell. And that thought was more unbearable than any amount of debt or drought or loneliness the plains could throw at her. She stayed because leaving felt like losing him twice. The evening of the stranger's arrival had started like every other evening that July of 1884. The heat had been merciless for 6 weeks running. The kind of heat that settled into the earth and stayed there, radiating back upward through the night, so that even after the sun was gone, the air still felt thick and pressed against the skin. Eleanor had been out since before dawn. She had ridden the eastern fence line in the morning, found 2 more posts that needed replacing, marked them with strips of red cloth so she could find them again in the week ahead. She had spent the afternoon in the equipment shed, trying to coax a broken wheel mechanism back into usefulness with nothing but wire and stubbornness and a vocabulary of quiet curses she had never used before. Daniel died. She was washing the grease from her hands at the pump when she heard the sound. Not a knock exactly, more like something hitting wood. Repeated. desperate in the way that repeated things are when the person doing them has run out of other options. Eleanor dried her hands on her trousers, reached through the back door, and pulled her rifle from its place beside the frame and walked around the side of the house to the front gate. "Who's there?" she called. No answer. Just the sound again. Something a fist maybe against the wooden slats of her gate. She came around the corner and stopped. The man was barely standing. That was the first thing she understood. He had both hands wrapped around two of the gate's vertical boards, and he was leaning into them in a way that made it clear the gate was doing as much work as his legs. He was tall. She could see that, even with him bent forward with dark hair, matted flat against his forehead, and a jaw covered in several days' growth of beard. His shirt was soaked through. His boots were worn so far down at the heels they looked like they'd been walked flat, and from the look of the rest of him, that was likely exactly what had happened. But it wasn't the man that stopped Eleanor Hayes from raising her rifle. It was the little girl. She was pressed against her father's leg. Her arms wrapped around his thigh, the way a child holds on to something when she is too frightened to speak. 7 years old, maybe. Dark-haired like her father. Her dress had once been blue and was now the color of dust. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth rather than shoes, and Eleanor's stomach turned over when she understood what that meant. The shoes had worn through somewhere on the road, and they'd made do with whatever they had. The little girl looked up at Eleanor with eyes that were enormous and very dark and entirely still. Not the stillness of peace. The stillness of a child who has learned not to cry because crying does not help. Behind the man lying curled on the ground against the gatepost was a small boy. He might have been 5. He was asleep or something close enough to asleep that Eleanor couldn't tell the difference from this distance, with his cheek pressed against the dirt and one arm folded under his head. Even from 10 feet away she could see how thin he was. She could see his ribs move with each breath. The man lifted his head. His eyes were brown, and they were the eyes of someone who had been humiliated enough times in recent memory that asking for anything at all was costing him more than Eleanor could calculate. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. His voice was rough and dry. "I can see you're alone here, and I'm not. I want you to know I'm not going to cause you any trouble. I wouldn't be here if I had anywhere else to go." Eleanor kept the rifle in her hands, not raised, but in her hands. "State your name," she said. "Thomas Walker." He said it plainly. Not like a man performing innocence, like a man who had given his name enough times recently that he'd stopped flinching when people reacted to it. "I used to work the Harmon spread 2 counties east of here before—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "Before I left." "What do you want, Mr. Walker?" He glanced down at his daughter. The girl had turned her face into his leg. He put one hand on the back of her head very gently, and when he looked back up at Eleanor, there was something in his expression that was past embarrassment and past pride and was simply raw. "My children haven't eaten a proper meal in 4 days," he said. "We've been walking since we left Harmon County. I was hoping to reach Millhaven before my boy—" He stopped again, looked at the small shape on the ground, swallowed. "He's not sick, ma'am. He's just spent. I carried him the last 6 miles, but I couldn't. I can't carry him any further tonight." Eleanor said nothing. "I'm not asking to come inside," Thomas said. "I'm not asking for money or charity or anything that costs you. If your barn is open, if there's room enough for 2 children to sleep off the ground tonight, I'll be gone by first light. You won't have to see us again. I give you my word on that." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the girl who had turned her face up now and was watching Eleanor with those still enormous eyes. She looked at the boy on the ground, the slow rise and fall of his ribs. She looked back at Thomas Walker. "How long since you slept?" she said. He blinked, like the question surprised him. I've been keeping watch at night, to make sure they're—" "That's not what I asked." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't rightly remember," he said finally. Eleanor stood there another 10 seconds. The weight of 3 years of careful solitude pressed against the inside of her chest. Every instinct she had built since Daniel died, every wall, every rule, every locked door pushed back against the thing her hands were already doing, which was reaching for the gate latch. "There's space in the barn," she said. "Enough straw for a bed. I'll bring something from the kitchen." She pushed the gate open. Thomas Walker did not move immediately. He looked at her like a man who is waiting to be told there is a condition attached. Some cost, some catch. People in his experience did not open gates without wanting something in return. "Mr. Walker," Eleanor said, "if I meant to send you away, I'd have done it already. Bring your children inside the fence." He reached down and gathered his son from the ground, cradling the boy against his chest. The boy stirred, turned his face into his father's neck, and went still again. Thomas straightened with what it clearly cost him. She could see the effort move through his back and shoulders, and walked through the gate. The girl followed, still holding her father's coat. Eleanor latched the gate behind them and walked toward the house. "What are your children's names?" she called back. "Lucy," Thomas said. "And Benjamin." "How old?" "Lucy's 7. Ben just turned 5 in May." Eleanor stepped up onto the porch and pushed open the kitchen door. "Get them into the barn. I'll bring water and food. There are 2 wool blankets on the shelf to the left when you go in the ones in the canvas wrapping. They're clean." "Ma'am." She stopped in the doorway and looked back at him. "I'm obliged to you," Thomas said. "More than I can say." Eleanor studied him for a moment. Something in the way he said it, not profuse, not falling over himself, the way men did when they wanted you to like them, just quiet and direct, like a man who knew what gratitude actually cost. "Get your children settled," she said. "You can be obliged to me in the morning." She went inside. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, after the door closed behind her, and pressed both hands flat on the table. The same table where the debt envelope sat, where she had eaten every meal alone for 3 years, where Daniel had once read the newspaper aloud to her in the evenings because he liked the way she argued with the editorials. She pushed that thought down. She went to the larder and pulled out what she had. Cold cornbread from that morning, a jar of honey, dried beef, a tin of peaches she'd been saving without knowing what for. She filled the water pitcher at the pump and found 2 tin cups and the oldest, softest blanket she owned, the one from the cedar chest that she never used because it had been Daniel's mother's and it deserved better than to be slept on. She looked at the blanket for a moment. Then she folded it over her arm and carried everything out to the barn. Thomas had found the wool blankets and spread them on the cleanest section of straw. Lucy was already sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, and she watched Eleanor come in with the same careful stillness she'd shown at the gate. Benjamin was still half asleep, blinking slowly, not quite sure yet where he was. Eleanor set the food down on the flat top of a fence post and poured water into both cups. "Drink slowly," she said to Thomas. "If they haven't had enough water, drink slowly." "Yes, ma'am." She handed the first cup to Lucy. The girl took it with both hands and held it for a moment before she drank, like she had learned to be careful with things that might be taken away. That gesture went through Eleanor Hayes like a blade. She crouched down to be at the girl's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucy." The voice was small, careful. "My name is Eleanor. Are you hungry, Lucy?" A pause. A nod. Eleanor broke a piece of cornbread and spread honey on it and held it out. Lucy took it. She ate the way children eat when they are very hungry and have been taught not to show it. Small bites steadily, without looking away from Eleanor. "Good girl," Eleanor said quietly. She turned and found Thomas watching her. He looked away immediately, like she'd caught him doing something private. Eleanor stood up and handed him the water pitcher. "Drink all of that, then eat something. I'll check on you in the morning." "You don't have to." "I didn't say I had to," Eleanor said. "I said I would." She turned to go. "Ma'am?" Thomas's voice stopped her at the barn door. "I didn't get your name." She looked back over her shoulder. "Eleanor Hayes." Something shifted in his expression. "Hayes. Is this the Hayes Ranch?" "It is." I was quiet for a moment. "I heard of this place. I heard a woman runs it alone." "That's right." "People in town say—" He stopped himself. "People in town say a lot of things," Eleanor said. "I've stopped listening." She walked back to the house. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the ranch, the horses shifting in their stalls, the wind moving through the grass, the occasional low sound from the barn, where 3 people she did not know were sleeping, and she tried to talk herself into the simple version of this situation. Strangers needed shelter. She had shelter. She had given it. They would leave in the morning. That was the end of it. But the girl's face kept coming back to her. The way Lucy had taken the cornbread with both hands. The stillness in her eyes. Eleanor knew that kind of stillness. She had felt it herself, that particular way of going quiet inside when you have been hurt enough times that you start to protect yourself by simply expecting less. By making yourself smaller. By gripping your father's coat and pressing your face into his leg and trying not to need anything, because needing things leads to the moment when things are taken away, and that moment is the worst moment in the world. Eleanor had not cried at Daniel's grave, but she had felt very small. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. By the time pale gray light began to show around the edges of the shutters, she had already made her decision about breakfast. She was at the kitchen stove when she heard the barn door. She did not turn around. She listened to footsteps cross the yard, one set heavy, careful, and then stop on the porch. A knock at the kitchen door. 3 times. Not desperate this time. Measured. "Door's open," she called. Thomas Walker stepped in. He looked better than the night before. Not good, the exhaustion was still in him like something set into the bone, but he had washed his face and hands, and he held his hat in both of his hands the way a man does when he is trying to show respect. "I wanted to thank you before we get moving," he said. Eleanor set a plate on the table. "Sit down, Mr. Walker." He looked at the plate, then at her. "Where are your children?" "Lucy's got Ben. They're still in the barn. I wanted to—" "Go get them," Eleanor said. "Bring them in. They'll eat here." "Ma'am, you don't need to." Eleanor turned from the stove and looked at him directly. "Mr. Walker, I have made biscuits. I have made eggs and salt pork, and there is coffee on. I am not going to stand here and argue about whether children should eat breakfast. Go get your children." Thomas Walker stood very still for a moment. Then something happened in his face that Eleanor would think about later, not analyze exactly, but return to in the way you return to something you don't quite understand yet. A kind of release. Like a man who has been carrying something a long time and has just been told for the first time in a while that he can set it down. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. He went out. Eleanor turned back to the stove. When Thomas came back with Lucy and Benjamin, Eleanor watched the boy look around the kitchen with the focused attention of a child cataloging a new place. He was small and dark-haired like his sister, and he had his father's jaw already suggesting stubbornness, and he looked at everything with very serious brown eyes that missed nothing. Lucy sat where Eleanor indicated, very straight, very careful. Benjamin climbed up beside her and immediately reached for the salt. "Benjamin," Thomas said. The boy looked at his father. "Wait," Thomas said. Benjamin considered this. Then he put the salt back. Eleanor set plates in front of both children and poured small cups of milk. She kept a house cow. One of the few extravagances she'd refused to give up, and watched Lucy's face when she lifted the cup. The girl closed her eyes for 1 second. Just 1 second. Then she opened them and drank. Eleanor sat down across from Thomas. "You said you worked the Harmon spread," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "What kind of work?" "Ranch hand. Everything. Fencing, livestock equipment. I did some breaking horses." He paused. "I'm good with horses." Eleanor looked at him. "Why'd you leave Harmon County?" The question landed in the room. Thomas set his coffee cup down. He glanced at his children who were focused on their plates, and then he looked at Eleanor with the directness of a man who has decided that the easiest thing and the right thing are the same thing. "I was accused of theft," he said, "by my employer." Eleanor did not look away. "Did you do it?" "No, ma'am." "What did they say you stole?" "Money. From the ranch account. $400. His jaw tightened. "I never touched it. Never would have touched it. I'd worked that spread for 6 years. I knew his wife, his sons. I was—" He stopped. "It didn't matter what I was. Once a man of Harmon's standing makes an accusation, the outcome's already decided. Were you charged? Formally, no. The constable there knew better. He'd known me long enough to know the accusation didn't fit. But Harmon made sure every rancher in 3 counties heard the story before any of that. By the time it was clear no charges were coming, it didn't matter. No one would hire me. He was quiet for a moment. I had my children to think about. Their mother passed 14 months ago. It's just the 3 of us. Eleanor looked at Lucy, who was listening with the careful attention of a child who has learned that adult conversations contain important information. "What was your wife's name?" Eleanor asked. Thomas glanced at her, like the question surprised him. "Margaret," he said. "Maggie." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He said it simply. Not performing grief. Just receiving the condolence the way you receive it when enough time has passed that it's become part of you. Eleanor picked up her coffee cup. "My husband's name was Daniel. He died 3 years ago." Thomas said nothing, but he looked at her, and she understood that the silence was not absence, but the opposite. The silence of someone who understands exactly what that sentence costs to say. "The ranch was his," Eleanor said. "I stayed. People think that was foolish." "People think a lot of things," Thomas said. Eleanor almost smiled. "That's what I said last night." "I know," he said. "I thought it was a good answer." They sat in the kitchen while the children finished eating, and the morning light came through the windows, and the ranch was quiet around them. "There's a fence line on the east side," Eleanor said eventually. 2 posts are split. I've been meaning to get to them, but I've had the equipment shed to deal with this week." Thomas looked at her. "If you wanted to work for a day or 2 before you moved on," Eleanor said carefully, "I'd pay you in meals and whatever cash I can manage. It's not much, but it would tide you over until you found something in Millhaven." A pause. "I don't want your charity, Mrs. Hayes." "It's not charity. I need the fence fixed and you need the work." She met his eyes. "Those are 2 separate problems that happen to solve each other. That's not charity, that's practical." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "Show me where the posts are." He stayed 3 days, then a week. By the end of the 2nd week, Eleanor had stopped counting days. It was not that she made any conscious decision. No line was drawn, no discussion had. It happened the way slow things happen, the way seasons shift, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small changes. Until one morning, you look up and realize the world is different from what it was. Thomas worked like a man who needed to justify his existence, which Eleanor understood. He was up before her every morning. She would come out of the house to find the horses already fed. The water troughs filled some task already half done that she'd been putting off for days. He fixed the eastern fence posts, then the 2 behind the equipment shed. He identified a problem with the roof of the barn that had been causing slow water damage to the corner stalls and climbed up and fixed it on a Wednesday while Eleanor was in town trying to negotiate a late payment with her grain supplier. She came home and looked at the repaired corner and said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Thomas, who was watching her from the barn door. "Thank you," she said. "Saw it needed doing," he said simply. She nodded and went inside. But she stood in the kitchen for a moment, with her hand on the back of a chair, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Something that felt like the particular relief of not having to carry everything alone. She was not ready to look at that feeling directly. Lucy began following Eleanor around the property. It started on the 4th day quietly. Eleanor would turn from whatever she was doing and find the girl a few feet away watching. Not underfoot, not demanding attention, just present, in the way of a creature that wants company and has learned to want it very quietly. "You can help if you like," Eleanor said on the 5th day at the chicken coop. Lucy blinked. "Help with what?" "Collecting eggs. You have to move your hands slow so they don't startle." She showed Lucy how to reach beneath a hen without spooking her. The girl was careful and quick to learn, and when she pulled out the first egg whole and unbroken, she held it up and looked at it with an expression of such complete satisfaction that something in Eleanor's chest tightened painfully. "Good," Eleanor said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. Lucy looked at her. Those still dark eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, Yes. Do you have children? A pause. The kind that comes from having to decide something quickly. No, Eleanor said. I don't. Lucy looked at the egg in her hands. Oh. Then, do you want some? Eleanor turned back to the coop before her expression could betray her. Let's finish collecting these, she said, before the light goes. By the third week, Benjamin had decided that Eleanor's barn was the most interesting place he had ever encountered in his 5 years of life. He could be found there at most hours of the day, conducting an ongoing investigation of its various contents with the thoroughness of a scientist and the attention span of a small boy. He talked to the horses. He had long, serious conversations with the barn cat, who bore them with the patience of an animal who has made peace with the absurdities of her situation. He asked Eleanor approximately 400 questions a day, most of them about horses, and she answered all of them because she had discovered that his questions were actually very good, and the conversations they led to were better than the silence she had been living in for 3 years. Why do horses sleep standing up? Benjamin asked one morning, hanging over the stall door. They can sleep lying down too, Eleanor said. But standing up lets them run faster if something scares them. Benjamin thought about this. That's smart. Horses are smart. Is yours smart? Eleanor looked at the gray mare in the stall. She's very smart. Smarter than she lets on, I think. Benjamin nodded seriously, as if this confirmed a theory he'd been developing. Like Papa, he said. Eleanor glanced at him. Papa acts like things don't bother him, Benjamin said. But they do. He said it matter-of-factly, the way small children state things that adults spend their entire lives trying to avoid stating. He cried once when he thought we were asleep. After Mama died. He thought we couldn't hear him, but I could hear him. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. He loves you very much, she said. Benjamin looked at her. I know. Then, do you have a papa? He died when I was young. A mama. She died too. Oh. Benjamin considered this. So you're alone like us. Eleanor looked at the boy, his father's jaw, his serious brown eyes, the complete absence of guile, and felt something shift inside her chest in a way that was not comfortable and was also unmistakably true. For a while I was, she said. Benjamin seemed satisfied with this. He turned back to the horse. I'm going to name her, he announced. She already has a name. What is it? Nell. Benjamin frowned. That's close to your name. That's right. He thought about this for a long moment. Okay, he said finally. I'll call her Nell, but I'll think of her as my horse. Do you think she'll know the difference? Benjamin looked at the mare very seriously. No, he decided. I don't think she will. Eleanor laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A real laugh, not polite, not restrained, just sudden and genuine and surprised. And the sound of it startled both her and Benjamin and the gray mare, and Eleanor pressed her hand over her mouth and felt the warmth of it spreading through her chest. Benjamin grinned at her. A wide, uncalculated 5-year-old grin. And Eleanor Hayes, who had not laughed like that in 3 years, found that she could not quite make herself regret it. That evening, Thomas came into the kitchen after the children were settled and found Eleanor at the table with her account books. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her without being asked. She noticed that he'd started doing that, making himself useful in the kitchen, putting on coffee in the evening, setting cups out without any discussion. Just quietly occupying the spaces where help was needed, the way competent people do. I've been thinking, he said. Eleanor kept her eyes on the figures. About the north pasture. The grass is coming back there. If you move the cattle to that section for the next 3 weeks and let the south fields rest. Eleanor looked up. I've been considering the same thing. He nodded. The creek's lower than it should be for July. If it drops much further, you'll have a problem with the south well. I know. She tapped her pencil against the page. I've been watching it. There's a way to divert. He stopped. I'm sorry. It's your ranch. I don't mean to... Thomas. She said his given name for the first time without noticing she was doing it. "If you see something that needs doing, say so. I've been managing this land alone for 3 years, and I'm good at it. But 2 people seeing a problem is better than 1. That's just arithmetic." He looked at her across the table. "Tell me about the diversion," she said. He told her. She listened carefully, asked 2 questions, pushed back on one element, and they worked out the approach together, while the lamp burned between them, and the night sounds of the Montana plains came through the window. Crickets, a distant coyote, the soft movements of horses at rest. At some point, Eleanor realized she had stopped looking at her account books entirely. She was just talking to him. She couldn't remember the last time she had just talked to someone. Really talked, not performed competence, not defended her choices, not endured the careful condescension of townspeople who meant well and managed to be insulting anyway. Just talked. Like a person. Like someone whose opinion on things was worth having. Thomas refilled her coffee cup without asking. She let him. It was Victor Caldwell who broke it open. She should have expected him sooner. Victor Caldwell had been circling Eleanor Hayes' ranch for the better part of 2 years, appearing every few months with a new offer wrapped in a different kind of pressure. First, it had been sympathy. Such a burden for a woman alone, he understood completely. No shame in recognizing one's limitations. Then, it had been impatience. She was being sentimental. The land wasn't worth what she believed. She was throwing good years after bad. Most recently, it had been threat dressed up as advice. The bank's patience wasn't infinite. Her creditors weren't charitable men. A forced sale would get her far less than a negotiated one. Eleanor had been polite every time. The politeness had taken a great deal of effort. Victor Caldwell was 45, successful by the standards of men who define success as the accumulation of things other people wanted, and he had the particular confidence of a man who has rarely been told no by anyone he considered his equal, which was a category he kept deliberately small. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after Thomas Walker had first knocked at Eleanor's gate. Eleanor was at the pump when she saw his horse coming up the road, and she dried her hands on her trousers and stood up straight and waited. Caldwell dismounted at the gate, left his horse, and came through without knocking. He had never knocked. Eleanor had noticed this. She had filed it. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, pulling off his gloves finger by finger. His eyes moved over the yard, the repaired fence. The clean equipment shed the evidence of recent concentrated work, and something in his expression shifted slightly, though he kept it contained. "You're looking well." "Mr. Caldwell." Eleanor did not offer her hand. "What can I do for you?" His gaze moved to Thomas, who had come out of the barn at the sound of an approaching horse, and was now standing at the barn door watching. "Who's that?" Caldwell said. "A ranch hand," Eleanor said. "What brings you out here?" Caldwell looked at Thomas for another moment. Something moved in his face. "A ranch hand," he repeated. "Where's he from?" "He works here," Eleanor said. "That's where he's from." "Mr. Caldwell, I haven't seen him before." Caldwell's voice had acquired a particular quality, not aggressive exactly, but pointed. The quality of a man who asks questions he already knows the answers to. "How long's he been on?" "A few weeks," Eleanor said. "Now you've ridden out here in the middle of a Wednesday, and I've got work to do, so if you'd—" "I'd heard you'd taken in some strangers." Caldwell finally looked away from Thomas and back at Eleanor. "I was concerned about you." "I appreciate the concern," Eleanor said. "I don't need it." "A woman running a ranch alone." "Is running a ranch," Eleanor said. "Just fine, as you can see." Caldwell smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. "I'm glad to hear it. I only want what's best for you, Eleanor. You know that." "I know you want my land," Eleanor said. "I've always known that. What I don't know is why you keep pretending otherwise." A pause. Something shifted in Caldwell's expression. The practiced warmth pulled back for just a moment, just enough for Eleanor to see what was underneath, which was colder and more calculating than the surface suggested. "You're a stubborn woman," he said. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I am." "That's going to be a problem for you eventually." "Maybe." She held his gaze. "But not today." Caldwell looked at Thomas one more time, and Eleanor watched what happened in his face as he watched him process the information of Thomas's presence, the repaired equipment, the evidence of labor and competence, and a ranch that was not failing the way he'd expected it to fail, and she watched him decide something. "I'll be seeing you, Mrs. Hayes," he said. He put his gloves back on and walked back to his horse. Eleanor stood in the yard and watched him ride away, and she felt the particular chill of a threat that hasn't been made yet, the kind that hangs in the air and waits. Thomas came to stand beside her. "Who was that?" he asked. "A problem," Eleanor said, "that I've been managing for 2 years." Thomas watched the road where Caldwell had gone. He was looking at me like he recognized me. Eleanor turned and looked at him. "He didn't," Thomas said. "I've never met that man in my life, but he was looking at me like he was deciding something." Eleanor looked back at the road. "His name is Victor Caldwell," she said. "He's the largest landowner in this county. He's been trying to acquire this ranch since Daniel died. He hasn't managed it yet." "Why does he want it?" "There are rumors," Eleanor said carefully, "about what's beneath this land. Water rights possibly. Mineral deposits. Nothing proven, but enough that men like Caldwell find it interesting." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "And he sees me here and thinks. He sees me not failing, and he looks for a reason why," Eleanor said. "And now he has one." She turned back toward the house. "Don't let it concern you. I've handled Victor Caldwell before." But as she walked back to the house, she felt the cold weight of it settle over her, the knowledge that the quiet weeks, the careful peace of the life that had been quietly assembling itself in this yard, were about to be tested. She did not know how soon. She did not know what form it would take. But Eleanor Hayes had lived long enough and lost enough to know that a man like Victor Caldwell did not ride away and give up. He rode away and made plans. And that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low and the sound of 3 people breathing in the house around her. Thomas in the barn, but closer. Benjamin asleep on the cot. She'd moved into the back room. Lucy curled in the chair by the stove with the old blanket over her. Eleanor Hayes looked at the account books and found she couldn't concentrate on the figures. She was listening to the sounds of a house that was not silent anymore, and she was afraid of how much she had in 3 weeks begun to need that. Caldwell did not come back the next day, or the day after that. That was the thing about men. Like Victor Caldwell, they did not operate in ways you could prepare for directly. They moved sideways. They planted seeds and walked away and let other people do the growing for them. Eleanor knew this. She had watched him work for 2 years. She had seen him dismantle 2 other ranches in the county without ever raising his voice or dirtying his hands. One family sold under pressure from their creditors. Creditors who Eleanor later understood had been quietly encouraged to call in their loans at the same time by the same man. Another rancher had simply disappeared from Millhaven one spring. His deed transferred the whole transaction completed so cleanly that most people in town didn't notice until the new fencing went up. Eleanor noticed. She had made it her business to notice everything about Victor Caldwell because she understood that the best defense against a man who works in shadow is to drag his methods into the light before he can use them on you. But knowing a man's methods and being able to stop them were 2 different things. She was thinking about this on the Thursday morning 6 days after Caldwell's visit when she came back from the eastern pasture and found Thomas in conversation with Hector Maines at the gate. Hector Maines ran the feed store in Millhaven. He was not a malicious man, not precisely. He was the kind of man who repeated what he heard because he could not distinguish between sharing information and spreading damage. He was talking to Thomas with the particular energy of someone delivering news he believes is important. Eleanor tied her horse at the post and walked over. "Mrs. Hayes," Hector said, adjusting his hat. "Morning." "Hector." She looked between the 2 men. "What's going on?" Thomas's face was still, the particular stillness she had learned to read as him controlling something. "I was just telling Mr. Walker here," Hector said, "that there's talk going around town about him being here." He glanced at Thomas. "Some people are saying, well, I heard from Jake Alderman that he heard from the Caldwell hands that your ranch hand here has got a history. Criminal type. I'm only saying because, "Where did the Caldwell hands hear that?" Eleanor said. Hector blinked. "Well, I couldn't say for certain." "I can," Eleanor said. "They heard it from Victor Caldwell, who invented it." She held Hector's gaze. "Thomas Walker is a ranch hand who has worked this property honestly for 3 weeks. I have seen his work, and I know his character. The next time someone tells you something about what happens on my ranch, you might consider asking me before you repeat it." Hector opened his mouth. "Have a good morning, Hector," Eleanor said. He left. Eleanor turned to Thomas. His jaw was tight. His eyes were on the road where Hector's horse was disappearing. "How long has Caldwell been in this county?" "Long enough to own most of it," Eleanor said. "And the sheriff?" Eleanor looked at him. "The sheriff is not in Caldwell's pocket if that's what you're asking. Marshal Gideon Cole is a fair man. But fair men can only work with what's put in front of them. And Caldwell is careful about what he puts in front of people." Thomas turned and looked at her, something hard and tired behind his eyes. "This is going to follow me," he said. "You know that. Whatever Caldwell's telling people, it's going to follow me here." "It might," Eleanor said. "Let it try." "Eleanor, don't." Her voice was quiet but final. "Don't tell me to be careful. Don't tell me you'll move on to protect me from the inconvenience. I know what Caldwell is doing, and I know why he's doing it, and I will not let him run a good man off my property because it suits his agenda. Is that clear?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most stubborn person I have ever met," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I know." She turned toward the house. "Come help me with the north pasture gate. The hinge is giving again." She heard him follow her without another word. But she also felt the shift in the air between them. Something that had changed since Caldwell's visit, some layer of ease replaced by awareness. Of what was coming. Of what was at stake. Of the fact that what had quietly built itself in this yard over 3 weeks was fragile, in the way that good things are always fragile, real enough to matter, exposed enough to be broken. She did not allow herself to think too long about how much she did not want it broken. The first real blow came on a Sunday. Eleanor went to church in Millhaven, not because she was particularly pious, but because absence was read as weakness, and she could not afford to be seen as weak. She put on her good dress, the gray wool, not the black. She had stopped wearing the black 2 years ago, and drove the wagon into town with Lucy beside her on the seat, and Thomas and Benjamin behind. She had not thought carefully about how that would look. She understood her mistake the moment she pulled up to the churchyard and saw the way people's heads turned. Not at her. At them. At all 4 of them together, arriving in a wagon like a family. Martha Gaines was the first to speak. She was 60 years old and had been the primary distributor of social opinion in Millhaven for the better part of 3 decades, and she approached Eleanor in the churchyard with the particular smile of a woman who has been waiting for a specific opportunity. "Eleanor, dear," she said, and then her eyes moved to Thomas with an expression of bright, terrible interest. "And this must be your ranch hand." "Thomas Walker," Eleanor said. "He works my property." "Of course he does." Martha smiled at Lucy and Benjamin, who were standing close to Thomas. "And these sweet children, living at your ranch, are they?" "Their father works there," Eleanor said. "Yes. How modern of you." Martha said it sweetly, lethally. "Daniel was always so open-minded, wasn't he? I think he would have found this very interesting." Eleanor felt Thomas go still beside her. "Daniel," Eleanor said carefully, "would have done exactly what I did. He would have seen a man in need and helped him." She held Martha's gaze. "And then he would have come to church and thanked God for being in a position to help, which is what I intend to do." She walked into the church. She heard Thomas's footstep behind her close, and felt Lucy's small hand find hers, without any warning. The girl's fingers wrapped around her palm and held on. Eleanor looked down at her, and Lucy looked up, and Eleanor squeezed her hand once gently. They sat in the 4th pew. They sang the hymns. Reverend Peters preached about charity, and Eleanor felt the irony of it settle over her like weather. On the way out, 3 women spoke to Eleanor. 2 of them did not. The ones who didn't were both connected to the Caldwell family through their husbands' business dealings. Eleanor filed that too. In the wagon on the way home, Benjamin asked why some of the ladies hadn't said hello. Because they were busy thinking about other things, Thomas said before Eleanor could answer. What things? Grown-up things. Thomas lifted the boy and settled him more securely beside him. Don't worry about it. Benjamin looked at Eleanor. Were they being mean to you? Eleanor kept her eyes on the road. They were being cautious, she said. Sometimes people are cautious about things they don't understand. Like what? Like a woman who doesn't do what they expected her to do. Benjamin thought about this. But you're good at the ranch, he said. I've seen you. Yes, Eleanor said. I am. So what's the problem? Eleanor almost smiled. You know, Benjamin, I have been asking myself that question for 3 years, and I haven't found a better answer than the one you just gave. Thomas made a short sound beside her that was not quite a laugh, but was close. The sound of it did something to the tightness in Eleanor's chest. Loosened it, just slightly. She kept her eyes on the road and said nothing. But she didn't try to undo what she felt either. That evening, after the children were asleep, Thomas came out to where Eleanor was sitting on the porch steps. He sat down beside her without asking, the way he'd started doing things quietly without ceremony, like he'd calculated the exact amount of space he was allowed to occupy, and was careful not to exceed it. He handed her a cup of coffee. She took it. Thank you, he said. For today. Martha Gaines was always going to say something, Eleanor said. Whether you were there or not. I know, I meant for what you said when she did. He wrapped both hands around his own cup. About Daniel. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. It was true. You didn't have to say it where anyone could hear. Yes, she said, I did. That's exactly where it needed to be said. The night was warm the way July nights in Montana can be warm even after dark, and the stars were very clear. In the distance, something moved through the grass, a deer probably or something small, and the horses shifted in the barn. Lucy told me something today, Thomas said. Eleanor looked at him. She said she wants to help you with the chickens again tomorrow. He paused. She's been talking about the chickens for 4 days, like they're a personal achievement. Eleanor thought of Lucy holding up the first unbroken egg. That expression. She's careful with them, she said. She's got good hands. Thomas looked at the far line of the ridge. Before Maggie died, Lucy talked constantly, he said. Every meal was a conversation. She had opinions about everything, and she shared all of them, and sometimes she'd talk so much I'd have to ask her to let someone else get a word in. He was quiet for a moment. After Maggie went, she just stopped. Weeks went by and she barely spoke. She answered questions if you asked directly, but she stopped volunteering, stopped putting herself forward, like she'd decided it was safer to be smaller. Eleanor looked at her coffee cup. She talks now, Thomas said. Not like before maybe, but she talks. He turned and looked at Eleanor directly. That's you. That's her father taking care of her, Eleanor said. That's a little girl healing on her own timetable. You gave her the timetable, Thomas said. You gave her somewhere safe enough to do it. Eleanor did not answer. They sat in silence for a while, and it was not empty silence. It was the kind that fills up with everything that's been said, and everything that hasn't, and holds both with equal weight. Eleanor, Thomas said. She looked at him. He seemed to be choosing something, like a man at a crossroads who has been standing still long enough and has finally decided which direction to move. I need to tell you something, he said, about why I really left Harmon County. She turned on the step to face him. I told you Harmon accused me of theft, Thomas said. That's true. What I didn't tell you is why he did it. Tell me now. Thomas set down his cup. Before the accusation, a few months before, a man came to the Harmon spread. Came to see Harmon directly. I didn't know who he was at first, but I was near the stable and I heard some of it. He paused. They were talking about a land deal, a large one, several properties in this county. The man wanted Harmon's cattle operation to relocate. He was buying up the northern range, and he needed Harmon to move his herd south, which would have cleared the way for whatever the man was doing with the land. Eleanor went very still. Harmon refused, Thomas said. At first. But then later, maybe 2 weeks later, Harmon called me in and told me this same man had made him an offer, a significant one, and that the deal required Harmon to provide him with certain information about which ranches in the county were struggling, which owners might be pressured to sell, which properties had potential disputes about deed or ownership that could be exploited. Eleanor's hand tightened around her coffee cup. I told Harmon I wouldn't be part of it, Thomas said. I told him if he was collecting information about his neighbors to hand to some outside operator, I didn't want to know about it, and I didn't want any part of it. He met Eleanor's eyes. 2 weeks after that, he told the county constable I'd stolen from the ranch account. The night sounds continued. Crickets. The distant coyote. The horses in the barn. Did you hear a name? Eleanor asked. The man who came to see Harmon. Thomas looked at her steadily. Caldwell, he said. Eleanor stood up. She walked to the edge of the porch and stood with her back to him and her hands at her sides and felt the pieces drop into place with the particular cold clarity of understanding something you should have seen sooner. Caldwell had been acquiring land across the county through financial pressure. He had been using Harmon's operation to gather information. Thomas had refused to participate and had been discredited for it. And now Thomas had ended up by chance on the one property in the county that Caldwell wanted most and hadn't been able to take. That was not a coincidence. Or rather, it had started as a coincidence. Thomas coming to her gate had been nothing but desperate necessity. But Caldwell seeing Thomas here on her land had turned it into something else. A threat. Because a man who had witnessed Caldwell's dealings, standing on the one property Caldwell couldn't acquire, was a problem that Caldwell could not afford to leave alone. He's not coming after me, Eleanor said. She turned around. He's coming after both of us, at once. Thomas stood up. Eleanor. He'll use you to get to the land, she said. Or he'll use the land to get to you, either way. She looked at him. How much of what you heard between Harmon and Caldwell could you testify to, if it came to a legal proceeding? Thomas stared at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Caldwell's been operating in the margins for 2 years because no one in this county has been willing to pull his methods into the open and make them visible. Her voice was tight and even. I'm thinking that if there is a man who heard him discussing those methods directly, then the situation changes. Eleanor. Thomas stepped toward her. Listen to what you're saying. You're talking about taking Victor Caldwell, the most powerful man in this county, to a legal proceeding on the testimony of an accused thief and a widow who can't make her loan payments. Yes, Eleanor said. That's not... I know it's not simple, she said. I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking whether you could testify to what you heard. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. I could. Then we have something. We have something that could get us both destroyed if we move wrong. We have something that gets us both destroyed if we don't move at all. She held his gaze. He's already started, Thomas. The rumors in town. The way he looked at you when he was here. He's building a case for something I don't know what yet, but I know it's coming. And sitting here waiting for it to arrive is not a strategy. It's just a slower way of losing. Thomas stood very close to her now. Close enough that she could see the decision moving through him, the calculation, the fear. And underneath both of them, something that looked a great deal like the same stubbornness she recognized in herself. What do you want to do? He said. I want to write to the land office in Helena, she said. Quietly. And I want to talk to Marshal Cole. Cole. He's fair. You said yourself you know his reputation. I said he was fair when what's in front of him is fair, Thomas said. I don't know how fair he is when the man on the other side is Caldwell. Then we find out, Eleanor said. The second blow came 4 days later, and it did not come quietly. It came in the form of a rider, early morning, carrying a sealed document addressed to Eleanor Hayes from the county land office. She opened it at the kitchen table, while the coffee was still too hot to drink, and Lucy was setting out cups with the careful attention she gave to all small tasks. She read it twice. Then she set it down flat on the table and put both hands over it, palms down, and breathed. Thomas came in from the barn. He took one look at her face. What is it? A formal inquiry, she said, into the deed status of this property. She slid it across the table. Specifically into whether the deed transfer from Daniel's estate to my name was executed correctly under Montana territorial law. Thomas read it. His jaw hardened. There was a provision, Eleanor said, in the territorial law as it stood in 1881, about property transfers to widows without a male co-signer. It was contested at the time. Most counties didn't enforce it, but it's on the books. She paused. Caldwell found it. This could be challenged. Yes, by a lawyer. In Helena. Which costs money I don't have. She looked at the paper. Which Caldwell knows. Lucy set down a cup very carefully. Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor looked up. The girl's face was serious. Too serious for a 7-year-old. The stillness was back, not the healing kind, the protective kind. Is someone going to take the ranch? Lucy asked. Eleanor looked at the child for a moment. Then she picked up the document, folded it deliberately, and set it aside. No, she said. But, no one is taking this ranch, Lucy. Her voice was even and clear. I have been standing on this land for 3 years, and I have not let it go yet. A piece of paper from a man with a pen is not going to change that. Lucy looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded a single decisive nod, like someone accepting a fact. Okay, the girl said. She went back to setting the table. Thomas looked at Eleanor across the cups and plates, and the folded document, and the accumulated weight of everything they'd just said aloud. His expression was not soft. It was something harder than soft, something that had been tested and come through still intact. We're going to Helena, he said. It was not a question. I can't leave the ranch, Eleanor said. I'll go, Thomas said. Give me the deed paperwork and everything you have on the property transfer. I'll go to Helena and I'll find out what options you have. He paused. And while I'm there, I'll talk to the Territorial Land Office about Caldwell's acquisition pattern. I know enough from what I heard at Harmon's to make someone in that office pay attention. Thomas, you'd be walking into Helena as an accused. The accusation was never formalized, he said. Harmon made noise, but he didn't file. There's no official charge. I'm a free man. His voice was quiet and absolutely steady. Let me be useful. Eleanor looked at him. Useful. As if that were the limit of what he was to her. As if what he'd become in 6 weeks, the morning coffee, the evening conversations, the way her house had stopped being silent, the way Benjamin made her laugh, the way Lucy had put her hand in hers in the churchyard, as if all of that fit inside the word useful. You don't have to do this, she said. This is not your fight. Thomas looked at her with something that was past patience and past gentleness, and was simply the truth. It is my fight, he said. It became my fight the night you opened your gate, and I think you know that. Eleanor dropped her eyes to the table. She was quiet for a long moment. Take the bay, she said finally. He's faster. And take the deed papers from the cedar box in the bedroom, the whole envelope, don't separate anything. Thomas nodded. And Thomas. She looked up. Be careful. He held her gaze for 1 second. Yes, ma'am. He left the next morning at first light. Eleanor stood at the gate and watched him ride out and felt something she was not willing to name, something that lived in the same place as grief, right beside it, occupying the same interior landscape, but pulling in the opposite direction. Benjamin was beside her. The boy watched his father ride until the horse was just a shape on the road, and then a suggestion, and then nothing. He'll come back, Benjamin said. Eleanor looked down at him. He always comes back, Benjamin said. It was not a statement of hope. It was a statement of fact made by a boy who had held on to facts like handholds through the hardest year of his life. I know he will, Eleanor said. She put her hand on top of Benjamin's head just briefly, the way you touch something you're glad exists. Then she turned back toward the ranch. Come on, she said. The horses need water before we start on the fence. The days without Thomas were loud in a different way than the days before he arrived had been silent. Before him, the silence had been absence. Now it was the space where someone was supposed to be and wasn't, a different thing entirely. More uncomfortable. more honest about what had changed. Eleanor threw herself into work the way she always had when she needed to not think. She and Lucy fixed 2 sections of the south fence. She moved the cattle to the north pasture the way she and Thomas had planned, coordinating it alone, which took twice as long and left her arms aching by sundown. She wrote a careful letter to Marshal Cole in Millhaven and sent it with the Wednesday Post writer, laying out what she knew about Caldwell's land acquisition methods and requesting a conversation at his convenience. Cole's response arrived on Friday. He would come Monday. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the cedar box with the deed papers, the originals, not the ones Thomas had taken. She had copies of everything and went back outside. That evening, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, Eleanor allowed herself to feel what she'd been keeping at arm's length for 3 days. She was afraid. Not of Caldwell exactly. Not of the legal inquiry, or the money, or even the prospect of losing the ranch. Those fears were familiar. She had been living with them so long, they had become part of the landscape, like the mountains. What frightened her now was something newer and more precise, the fear of having allowed something in that she could no longer ask to leave. She had opened her gate for one night, and now Thomas Walker and his children were woven into the fabric of this place so completely that she could not imagine what it would look like to unweave them. Lucy's voice in the chicken coop. Benjamin's conversations with the horse. The coffee that appeared every morning now because someone put it on, and the sound of footsteps that were not hers in a house that had been nothing but her own footsteps for 3 years. She could not unweave it. The question was whether she was brave enough to keep weaving. She was still sitting with that when she heard hoofbeats. She stood up. One horse, moving fast, coming from the north road. She was inside and back with the rifle before the horse reached the gate. 3 seconds, no more, and she came out onto the porch with the rifle in both hands and her heartbeat steady because whatever was coming, she would face it. The rider pulled up at the gate. It was Thomas. He had been gone 3 days. He was back on the 4th, and the look on his face as he dismounted, not relief, not triumph, but something urgent and careful, told her immediately that what he'd found in Helena was more than they'd expected. She lowered the rifle. He came through the gate and up the porch steps and stopped in front of her. "You need to hear what I found," he said. "Come inside," Eleanor said. She put the rifle back. She poured 2 cups of coffee because some things you do by instinct. She sat down across from him at the kitchen table that had become the table where everything real was discussed, every decision made, and she looked at him and said, "Tell me." Thomas set a folded paper on the table between them. "That's a copy of a land acquisition filing," he said, "submitted to the Territorial Land Office in Helena 8 months ago. Under a shell company, not Caldwell's name directly. But the attorney of record is a man named Pruitt who works exclusively for Caldwell's holdings." He met her eyes. "It lists 12 properties in this county as target acquisitions. Your ranch is listed second." Eleanor looked at the paper. 8 months ago. Before the deed inquiry. Before the rumors about me. He filed this 8 months ago. Thomas's voice was controlled, but the control was working hard. "Eleanor, this was never just about your land. He's been building a map, a consolidated acquisition probably for water rights to the whole northern drainage. Every ranch on this list sits on some part of the Millhaven Creek system." Eleanor sat back. The weight of it was different from what she'd expected. Not heavier, she'd been carrying heavy for 3 years. But wider. Larger than one ranch. Larger than one widow and one wrongfully accused man. Larger than anything she'd thought she was fighting. "How many ranches on that list have already sold?" she asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. 7. 7. 7 families. 7 properties. 7 sets of people who had faced some version of what Eleanor was facing. The financial pressure, the manufactured crises, the slow isolation, and had not been able to hold. "The other 4, she said. 3 are struggling. 1, he paused. 1 is old Jim Carey's place. He's 82. His son moved to Denver 2 years ago. He doesn't have anyone helping him, and he probably doesn't know what he's sitting on. We need to talk to him," Eleanor said immediately. Thomas looked at her. Before Caldwell gets to him, she said, Jim Carrey needs to know what he has and what someone is trying to take from him. Eleanor, I know. She looked at the paper. I know it's more than we planned for. I know. She pressed her fingers flat against the table. But if Caldwell can isolate us, if he can keep us each thinking we're fighting our own private battle, he wins. He's been winning for 8 months because no one on that list knew about anyone else on that list. Thomas was watching her. What if they did? She said. He was quiet. What if the people on that list, the ones who haven't sold yet, what if they knew about each other? What if they compared what's been done to them? What if they walked into Marshall Cole's office together? She looked at Thomas. What's Caldwell's power in this county? It's that he's bigger than any one person who pushes back. But he's not bigger than all of them together. Thomas sat very still for a moment. Then he said, You are the most dangerous person I have ever met. Eleanor looked at him. Is that a problem? No, Thomas said. No, it is not a problem. He almost smiled, and Eleanor almost did too. And the kitchen was very quiet, and the lamp was low, and somewhere in the back of the house, a small boy was sleeping with one arm under his head, the way he always slept, and a 7-year-old girl who had stopped trusting the world was slowly, carefully beginning to trust it again. 12 names, 12 properties, 7 already gone, 4 left plus hers. Monday, she said, Cole is coming. I know. And before Monday, she said, I want to ride out to Jim Carrey's place. Thomas nodded. And I want to find out, Eleanor said quietly, who else on this list is still standing, and whether they'd be willing to stand together. She picked up the paper. Outside, the Montana night held everything. It always held. The stars, the wind, the vast silence of the plains pressing against the walls of the house. But inside, something had shifted, had gathered itself into something with weight and direction, and the particular momentum of people who have stopped waiting for things to happen to them and have decided quietly and without performance to make something happen instead. Thomas reached across the table and, without quite looking at her, covered her hand with his. He left it there for just a moment. Eleanor did not pull away. She looked at the paper in her other hand and thought about 12 names and 7 lost and 4 left, and 1 fight that had just become larger than she'd known how to name. Then she folded the paper carefully, set it in the cedar box, and said, Get some sleep. We ride at first light. They rode out to Jim Carrey's place before the sun had cleared the ridge. Eleanor took the bay. Thomas had brought him back in good shape, better than she'd sent him, and Thomas rode the roan gelding that had been Daniel's horse, and that Eleanor had never quite been able to sell. The morning was cool enough that their breath showed, which would not last past 8 o'clock. But for now, the air had that clean, brief quality that July mornings sometimes produced before the heat remembered itself and settled back in. Lucy and Benjamin were left in the care of Dora Finch, the rancher's wife a mile east, who had known Eleanor long enough to not ask unnecessary questions. Eleanor had knocked on Dora's door at first light, and Dora had opened it, looked at Eleanor's face and said, How long? And Eleanor had said, Back before supper, and that was the entire conversation. Jim Carrey's ranch was 11 miles north. They rode mostly in silence, which was the comfortable kind, the kind that 2 people arrive at when they have already said enough to each other that silence doesn't feel like absence. At the 4-mile mark, Thomas said, What do you know about Carrey? 82 years old, Eleanor said. Came to Montana before the war. Built the spread from nothing, same as everyone up here who built anything. His wife died, I want to say, 15 years ago. His son Frank moved to Denver in '82, and I don't believe he's been back since. She paused. Jim's proud. He'll hate being helped. You need to let him think he's helping us. Thomas glanced at her. That's a fine distinction. It's the only one that works with men like him. She kept her eyes on the road. Don't offer him anything. Ask him what he's noticed. Ask what's been happening on his land. Let him tell it, and then show him the paper, in that order. You've done this before. I've managed stubborn people before, Eleanor said. It's most of what running a ranch alone amounts to. Thomas said nothing for a moment. Then, You're good at this. At what? At seeing people, at knowing what they need before they say it. Eleanor looked at the road. I had to get good at it, she said. When you're a woman dealing with men who've already decided you don't know what you're doing, you learn to listen for what's underneath the words. Because what's underneath is usually the real conversation. Thomas nodded slowly. They rode the rest of the way in that comfortable silence again. Jim Carrey was in his yard when they arrived. He was thin in the way of very old men who have been physical all their lives. Not fragile, just reduced to essential parts, every unnecessary ounce long since worked away. He wore no hat, despite the climbing sun, and he held a fence post in both hands that he'd clearly been working on, and he looked at Eleanor and Thomas the way a man looks at visitors who show up uninvited, which is with the particular assessment of someone deciding how long this is going to take. Eleanor Hayes, he said, not warmly, not coldly, just factually. Mr. Carey, she dismounted. Thank you for seeing us. Didn't know you were coming, he said. No, sir. I apologize for that. He looked at Thomas. Who's this? Thomas Walker. He works my ranch. Jim Carrey looked at Thomas for a long moment with the assessment of a man who has spent 82 years reading other men and made an art of it. Thomas held the look without flinching, which Eleanor noticed and suspected Jim Carrey noticed too. Come in then, Jim said. Coffee's on. They sat in Jim Carrey's kitchen, which was a working kitchen, the kind that had not been renovated or improved since the original construction, and wore that fact without apology. Jim poured coffee into 3 tin cups and sat down across from them and looked at Eleanor with eyes that were sharp in the way that age sometimes sharpens people rather than dulling them. Something's happened, he said. Yes, sir. On your property? Yes, and possibly yours. She paused. Mr. Carey, what's changed on your ranch in the last year? I was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Why? Because I think you've noticed something, Eleanor said. And I think you've been trying to figure out what it means alone. And I have information that might help you understand it. Jim Carrey wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. My east water right, he said. There's a claim been filed against it. Someone saying the original survey was wrong. That the creek boundary puts me 20 feet west of where I've always believed. He set the cup down hard. I've had that water right for 40 years. I've run cattle on it for 40 years. Now some man in a suit from the land office shows up and tells me there's a question. Eleanor reached into her coat and put the folded paper on the table. Is that man's name Pruitt? She said. Jim Carrey stared at the paper. How do you know that name? Because he filed that document, she said, on behalf of Victor Caldwell, who has been quietly acquiring properties across this county through exactly this method: manufactured disputes, financial pressure, legal challenges that cost more to fight than most people can afford. She met Jim's eyes. Your ranch is on a list, along with 11 others. 7 have already sold. The old man did not move for a moment. Then he unfolded the paper and read it. Slowly, carefully, the way a man reads something he intends to fully understand before he responds. He set it down. I am going to need, he said very quietly, to visit my lawyer in Millhaven. You're going to need to do more than that, Eleanor said. You need to do it alongside the other ranchers on that list who haven't sold yet, together, in Cole's office. Jim looked at her. Marshall Cole. He's fair, Thomas said, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. I've asked around. He's a fair man. Fair men work with what they're given, Jim said. The same thing Thomas had said to Eleanor, almost word for word. Eleanor almost smiled. Caldwell's got resources. We've got something better, Eleanor said. Thomas was at the Harmon spread when Caldwell came to negotiate that acquisition. He heard the conversation. He can testify to the method directly. She paused. And we have this document. And if the remaining 4 ranchers come forward together with a consistent account of what's been done to each of them, that's not one person's complaint. That's a pattern. That's something a territorial land commission has to respond to. Jim Carrey looked at Thomas. You'd testify to what you heard. Yes, sir. That takes some nerve, Jim said. Standing up against Caldwell in this county. Yes, sir, Thomas said again. It does. Jim was quiet for a moment. He looked at Eleanor. Frank told me to sell, he said with a rough edge in his voice. Told me 2 years ago the land wasn't worth the work at my age, that I should take whatever someone offered and come to Denver. He looked at the paper. I told him this land is what his mother's hands built too, that I wasn't selling what she helped make. He stopped. Nobody in Denver understood that. I understand it, Eleanor said. He looked at her for a long moment. I know you do, he said. You're Daniel Hayes's widow. You stayed on that land when every reasonable person said to go. He tapped the paper. Tell me what you need from me. They rode back with Jim Carey's agreement and the names of 2 other ranchers on the list whom Jim knew well enough to vouch for. It was midday, and the heat had arrived fully, now pressing down the way it did. Neither Eleanor nor Thomas spoke much on the way back. They were both doing the same thing, running calculations, measuring what they had against what they needed. At the 2-mile mark from home, Thomas said, Do you think Cole will move on this? If we give him what he needs to move, yes, Eleanor said. Cole doesn't want Caldwell owning this county any more than we do. He just needs cover, something to stand on officially, so he can't be accused of targeting a prominent man without cause. The document gives him that. The document plus your testimony, plus Jim Carey, plus 2 more ranchers gives him something he can take to the territorial office, Eleanor said. That's above Caldwell's reach. Caldwell can pressure a county marshal. He can't pressure Helena. Thomas nodded. She did not tell him the rest of what she was thinking, which was that they had perhaps a week before Caldwell moved again. Possibly less. He had spies in Millhaven, she had no doubt of that, and someone would report that Eleanor and Thomas had ridden north. Caldwell would calculate the destination. He was not a slow thinker. They had to move faster than he expected. That Saturday, Eleanor sent 3 separate riders out with letters to the ranchers. Jim had named Hank Bridger and the Somers family 8 miles west, asking them to meet at the Hayes Ranch the following evening. She did not put the purpose in the letters because she did not know who might read them before they arrived. She wrote only that she had information affecting their properties and requested an urgent meeting. While she waited, she prepared. She went through every document in the cedar box, every deed record, every payment ledger, every letter from the bank, every piece of paper that touched the legal and financial history of this ranch. She organized them in the order a lawyer would want to see them. She made a second set of notes in her own hand, laying out the timeline of Caldwell's actions as clearly as she could reconstruct it. Thomas sat with her each evening while she worked, going over the sequence of what he'd heard at Harmon's place, sharpening the details, making sure his account was consistent and specific. Because Caldwell's lawyer, and he would have one, a good one, would look for inconsistencies, would look for the seam where a story could be pulled apart. Tell me again what Harmon said, Eleanor said on the Friday evening. Thomas set down his coffee cup. He said Caldwell's man Pruitt came with a written proposal, an acquisition offer for the northern properties framed as a business consolidation, water rights management. He made it sound like he was doing the county a service. What did Harmon say? At first he said no. He said he'd built his operation where it was, and he wasn't moving his herd for anyone. Thomas paused. Then Pruitt came back. Second visit, just the 2 of them. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was on the far side of the stable wall. He met Eleanor's eyes. Pruitt told Harmon that if he cooperated certain information about Harmon's own land filing from 1873, certain irregularities in the original survey would be overlooked. If he didn't cooperate, those irregularities might come to the attention of the territorial office. Eleanor looked up from her notes. Blackmail. Yes. That's different from manufactured disputes, Eleanor said. That's direct coercion. Thomas, if you can testify to that specifically, I can. That changes the nature of what we're bringing to Cole. She sat back. That's not just a pattern of aggressive acquisition. That's criminal coercion. That's something a territorial prosecutor can work with. Thomas looked at her steadily. It also makes me a more significant witness, he said, which makes me a more significant target. The word settled between them. Eleanor did not look away from it. I know. Caldwell will come at me before I can testify, Thomas said. Whatever he's been building, the rumors, the inquiry into your deed that was set up. Once he knows I was at Harmon's and I've been talking to people, he'll accelerate." "I know," Eleanor said again. "You're not worried." "I'm very worried," she said. "I'm worried and I'm doing it anyway. Those two things can be true at the same time." Thomas looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face, something that was not pity and not admiration exactly, but a particular kind of recognition. The look of someone who sees something in another person that they recognize from inside themselves. "I know they can," he said quietly. The Saturday riders came back with confirmation from both Bridger and the Somers. They would come Sunday evening. Eleanor spent Saturday night making a list of every point that needed to be covered, and then she put the list away because making lists was only useful until a certain point. And past that point, what mattered was not the list, but the people in the room. She was up before dawn on Sunday. Thomas found her at the kitchen table before 6. The lamp lit the notes, spread out, a second cup already poured and waiting across the table. He sat down and looked at the cup and then at her. "You knew I'd be up," he said. "I know you don't sleep well when something's coming," she said. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "Neither do you." They sat in the early morning quiet and went through it one more time. The testimony, the document, the sequence, the names. Not because they needed to, because the repetition was a kind of steadying away of holding the structure of the thing when the pressure wanted to make it collapse. At one point, Thomas set down his cup and said, "What happens after?" Eleanor looked at him. "After Cole, after the hearing if it goes well, after Caldwell is dealt with." He held her gaze. "What happens to us?" The lamp between them was low. The morning was just starting to show at the edges of the shutters. Eleanor said nothing for a moment. "I don't know," she said. "That's honest." "I try to be." Thomas nodded slowly. "I came to your gate asking for one night," he said. "I'm aware that what's happened since then was not what either of us planned." "No," Eleanor said. "It wasn't." "Lucy called this place home last week," he said. "She said it to Benjamin. She didn't know I was listening. She said back home." He stopped. "I don't know what to do with that." Eleanor looked at the notes on the table. Then she looked at him. "She's not wrong," she said quietly. The words cost her something. She felt them leaving her chest with the particular weight of a truth you've been carrying a long time, and finally set down in front of someone. Thomas looked at her for a long, still moment. Then Benjamin's voice called from the back room, just his name for his father, short and sleepy, and Thomas pushed back his chair and went. Eleanor sat alone at the table for a moment. She pressed one hand flat against the notes and felt the paper under her palm and felt the whole weight of Sunday ahead of her. Jim Carey and Hank Bridger and the Somers family coming to her table. The case they were going to have to build, the fight still in front of them. She felt all of it. And underneath it, persistent and unignorable, the thing Thomas had named in the early morning dark, what happens after. She didn't have the answer, but for the first time in 3 years, she wanted one. Hank Bridger arrived first, late Sunday afternoon on a horse that looked like it had been pushed hard. He was a stocky man of 50, weathered and direct, with the bearing of someone who had worked outdoor labor his entire life, and was proud of it. He shook Eleanor's hand at the gate, actually shook it, which she noticed because many men still reached past her to shake the hand of whoever was standing nearby. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "your letter worried me." "Good," Eleanor said. "Come inside." The Somers came 20 minutes later. Tom Somers and his wife Ada in their 40s, with the careful, watchful quality of people who have been through something recently and are still deciding what it means. Ada Somers shook Eleanor's hand too, and held it an extra moment, and something passed between them that did not require words. Jim Carey arrived last, later than expected, which Eleanor noted, but said nothing about. He came inside and sat down at the end of the table that had now expanded to hold 6 people, and he looked around the room with his sharp old eyes and said nothing. Thomas poured coffee for everyone. Eleanor stood at the head of the table. "I'm going to tell you what I know," she said, "and then I'm going to show you a document, and then I want each of you to tell me what's happened on your property in the last 18 months. Because I believe when you hear each other's accounts, you're going to understand something that I did not understand until 4 days ago. She told it straight. The deed inquiry. Thomas's testimony from Harmon's spread. The filing document with Pruitt's name on it and 12 properties listed. The 7 already acquired. Their names on the remaining list. She put the document in the center of the table and let them read it. Hank Bridger read it and looked up and said, "Son of a—" "Yes," Eleanor said. Ada Summers said, "Our creek boundary." They told Tom the original filing had an error. "Same method as Jim Carey's water right," Eleanor said. "Same method as my deed. Manufactured legal questions that cost money to fight." Tom Summers's jaw tightened. "We borrowed against the property to pay the legal fees. We're deeper in debt now than before they filed the dispute. Which," he stopped, "which makes you easier to pressure into a sale," Eleanor said. "Yes." Ada Summers reached across the table and covered her husband's hand with hers. Tom Summers looked at the document, and the look on his face was not despair. It was anger, the clean, burning kind that comes when you finally understand that what happened to you was deliberate. 7 already gone, Hank Bridger said. He tapped the list. The Halverson place. They sold in the fall. I helped them move. I thought it was financial trouble. He paused. It was financial trouble. But it was his financial trouble. Yes, Eleanor said. And you want to go to Cole, Jim Carey said from the end of the table. Together, Eleanor said. All of us, Monday morning. With this document and Thomas's testimony about the coercion at Harmon's place and your individual accounts of what's been done to your properties. Caldwell will, Hank started. Caldwell will react, Eleanor said. Yes, but reaction is different from action. Right now he's been acting and we've been reacting. Monday we change that. The room was quiet for a moment. Tom Summers said, What do we stand to lose if this goes wrong? It was the right question. Eleanor had known someone would ask it. She looked at him directly. What you stand to lose if this goes wrong is what you're already losing, she said. Your land, your water rights, everything you built. That's already the direction this is moving on Caldwell's timetable. Going to Cole means we try to set our own timetable. Ada Summers looked at Eleanor. You really believe Cole will act on this? I believe Cole has been waiting for something he can act on, Eleanor said. A fair man doesn't sit still when the county he's responsible for is being systematically stripped. He sits still when he has no legal ground to stand on. We're giving him ground. Ada looked at her husband. Something passed between them, the particular language of a couple who has weathered things together. We're in, Ada said. Tom nodded. Hank Bridger put his hand flat on the document. Me too. They all looked at Jim Carey. The old man was quiet for a moment. He looked around the table at Eleanor at Thomas, at the Summers at Bridger, with those sharp 82-year-old eyes that had seen a lot of people make a lot of decisions. My wife built her kitchen garden on that creek bank, he said finally. She carried water from that creek every day for 30 years. I will not let some man in a suit take her water. He looked at Eleanor. Monday morning. Eleanor let out a breath. Monday morning, she said. They stayed another hour going through details, who would bring which documents, what each person needed, to prepare the sequence in which they would present it to Cole. Eleanor ran it like a negotiation which she had learned from 3 years of negotiating alone. Specific. Ordered. No wasted motion. By the time the Summers and Bridger left, and Jim Carey had ridden off into the darkening evening, it was late and the kitchen smelled of coffee and the pressure of people deciding something. Thomas was washing cups at the basin. Eleanor sat at the table with the document in front of her. It'll work, Thomas said without turning from the basin. It might work, Eleanor said. It'll work. He turned. I've watched you work a room for 3 hours. I've watched you take 4 people who came in scared and defensive and leave them ready to walk into a marshal's office together. That's not something that happens without skill. He picked up a cloth. It'll work. Eleanor looked at him. You sound certain, she said. I've learned, he said, that where you're concerned, certain is usually the appropriate position. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be... The sound stopped her. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast. Thomas dropped the cloth. Eleanor was on her feet. She had the rifle in hand before she fully registered that she'd moved, which was 3 years of living alone, distilling itself into reflex. She put herself between the door and the back room where the children were sleeping. Thomas was beside her before she could say anything. 3 riders at the gate. Not coming through stopped at it. One held a lantern. The light moved over a face Eleanor recognized. Deputy Caswell. Caldwell's man on the county payroll. The thing she'd always known about Caswell, but had never been able to prove. Caswell called out, "Thomas Walker." Eleanor felt Thomas go rigid beside her. "Thomas Walker." Caswell called again. "I have a warrant for your arrest, issued out of Harmon County. Charge of theft $400. You are required to come with us." Eleanor stepped out onto the porch. "Deputy Caswell," she said. Her voice was flat and clear. "Show me the warrant." A pause. The lantern moved. "Mrs. Hayes, this is illegal. Show me the document," she said. "A warrant is a piece of paper, and I want to read it." Caswell rode closer to the gate. He held out a folded paper. Eleanor stepped down from the porch and walked to the gate and took it without opening the latch. She read it by the light from the house. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Inside, something was cold and very precise. The warrant was dated 4 days ago, issued in Harmon County, signed by a justice of the peace she didn't know. The charge was formalized theft, $400. The same accusation that had never been formalized. Until now. Until Thomas had gone to Helena. Until they had started building a case. Caldwell knew. Of course he knew. She had known he would. She had not expected him to move this fast. She folded the warrant and held it back through the gate. "The warrant appears to be in order," she said. She heard Thomas's footstep behind her on the porch, and she turned and looked at him, and she held his gaze for a moment that contained everything they had built, and everything that was about to be tested, and the names on a list, and Jim Carrey's wife's kitchen garden, and 2 children asleep in the back room who had already lost too much. Thomas walked down off the porch. He walked to the gate. He stopped beside her, and for just a moment he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air, and she wanted to say something and could not find the words for what needed to be said. "The children," he said quietly. "I have them," Eleanor said. "I promise you." He looked at her. "Eleanor." "I promise you," she said again. He nodded once. He looked at Caswell. "I'll come," he said. "No trouble." Eleanor opened the gate. Thomas stepped through. Before Caswell could move, Thomas looked back at Eleanor one last time. He was backlit by the lantern light, and he looked at her with something in his face that was not fear and was not despair, but was the particular expression of a man who has lost before and survived it, and is choosing even now to believe that surviving it matters. "I came here asking for one night in your barn," he said. "You gave me something better." Eleanor's throat was tight. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I'm not finished." He almost smiled. Then Caswell's riders closed around him, and they moved out onto the road, and the sound of hooves on dry ground filled the night, and then faded, and then was gone. Eleanor stood at the open gate in the dark. Behind her, from the back room, she heard Lucy's voice, small, frightened. "Mrs. Hayes." Eleanor closed the gate. She turned around. She walked back to the house, up the steps, through the door, and into the back room. Lucy was sitting up on the cot, her hair loose, her eyes wide. Benjamin was still asleep beside her, one arm under his head, his face completely unguarded, the way children's faces are in sleep. Lucy looked at Eleanor. "Where's Papa?" Eleanor sat down on the edge of the cot. She took Lucy's hand in both of hers. "Some men came and took him," Eleanor said. She said it plainly because Lucy was a girl who handled the truth better than softened versions of it. "They say he did something wrong, but he didn't, and I'm going to prove that." Lucy's face did not crumple. It went very still. "You promise," she said. Eleanor looked at this girl, at the dark, enormous eyes, at the stillness that was not peace, but was also not anymore, the purely protective kind. There was something else underneath it. something that had been slowly growing over 6 weeks of egg collecting and morning coffee and evenings on the porch. It was trust, fragile and new and real. Eleanor held it in both hands. "I promise," she said. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she lay back down beside her brother and pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes. Eleanor sat there until the girl's breathing slowed. Then she stood up and went back to the kitchen table and sat down with the notes and the document and the list of 12 names, and she started writing. She had promised. She was going to have to do a great deal more than go to Cole on Monday morning now. She was going to have to take Victor Caldwell apart piece by piece in public in front of people who had the power to stop him. And she was going to have to do it fast before a justice of the peace in Harmon County moved Thomas somewhere Eleanor couldn't reach. She had one night. She used all of it. She wrote until the lamp burned low, and she had to trim the wick twice to keep the light. By the time the first gray showed at the window edges, Eleanor had 4 separate documents on the table in front of her. The first was a formal written account of Thomas Walker's testimony. Everything he had told her about the Harmon meeting written in her hand, but structured the way she believed a legal document should be structured, specific dates, where known direct quotations, where Thomas had been certain of the wording, and a clear notation where she was working from paraphrase. The second was a timeline she had reconstructed of Caldwell's acquisition activities across the county. Every property, every known method, every date she could pin. The third was a letter to Marshal Cole, written not as a request, but as a formal presentation of evidence, asking him to delay any transfer of Thomas Walker to Harmon County jurisdiction until a hearing could be convened. The fourth was a letter to the Territorial Land Office in Helena, marked urgent, laying out the acquisition document Thomas had brought back and requesting an immediate investigation. She read all 4 back. She changed 3 things. Then she folded them and set them in order on the table. She put on coffee. She sat in the kitchen and watched the window lighten and thought about Thomas in a jail cell somewhere between here and Harmon County. And she took that thought and put it in a specific place in her chest, the same place she had put Daniel's death and the bank notices and every other thing that could have undone her, and she held it there, felt it, acknowledged it. And then she stood up and poured her coffee and went to wake Lucy and Benjamin. Lucy was already awake. The girl was sitting on the edge of the cot with her hands in her lap and her back straight. She looked at Eleanor and did not ask the question she was asking. "He's in Mill Haven," Eleanor said. "I'm going there this morning. You and Benjamin are going to Dora Finch's again." "I want to come," Lucy said. "I know." Eleanor sat down beside her. "But I need to move fast today, and I can't do that and watch over Benjamin at the same time. Dora's safe. You know Dora." Lucy considered this with the seriousness she brought to all things. "Will you tell me what happened?" "Everything," Eleanor said. "When I come back, I'll tell you everything." Lucy nodded. One decision made set aside, moving to the next. "Okay." Benjamin woke up, hungry and confused, and Eleanor fed him biscuits and cold milk, and explained with the directness she had learned was the only thing that worked with him that his father was in town, and she was going to go get him, and they needed to be very good at Dora Finch's house. Benjamin absorbed this, looked at his biscuit, and then looked up. "Like you got him before," he said. Eleanor looked at him. "What do you mean?" "When bad men had him before," Benjamin said, "you went and got him." Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. In 5 years of complete attention to everything happening around him, Benjamin had apparently drawn a conclusion she hadn't articulated even to herself, that Eleanor Hayes was the person who fixed things. That when things went wrong, she was the one who went and made them right. She was not going to be the one to tell him that was too large a weight for one person. "Yes," she said. "Like that." Benjamin went back to his biscuit. "Okay," he said. She dropped them at Dora Finch's before 7. Dora looked at Eleanor's face, and then at the children, and then back at Eleanor and said, "You need anything besides someone to watch them?" "Send your boy to Jim Carey's place," Eleanor said. "Tell him what happened last night and tell him I need him at Cole's office by 8:30. Dora didn't ask why. She turned to the house and called her son's name. Eleanor rode for Mill Haven. She rode hard. She arrived at the marshal's office at 10 minutes past 7, tied the bay at the post, and went straight through the door without knocking. Marshal Gideon Cole was at his desk. He was a large man, 50s, with the particular quality of stillness that came not from laziness, but from someone who had spent a long time learning when to move and when not to. He looked up when Eleanor came through the door without knocking, and his expression did not change. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "You have Thomas Walker," she said. "Caswell brought him in last night," Cole said. "Warrant from Harmon County, I know. I read it." She set the 4 documents on his desk. "I need 5 minutes of your attention before you do anything with that warrant." Cole looked at the documents. He looked at her. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Sit down, Mrs. Hayes." "I'd rather stand." "I know. Sit down anyway. I think better when people aren't looming." She sat. Cole picked up the first document. He read slowly with the attention of a man who read carefully rather than quickly, which she respected even when it cost her time. He set it down, picked up the second, read that, then the timeline, then the letter to Helena. He set the last one down. He was quiet for a moment. "The acquisition document," he said. "Where did this come from?" "Thomas Walker retrieved a copy from the Territorial Land Office in Helena 4 days ago. It's a legitimate filing. Pruitt is the attorney of record. Pruitt is Caldwell's man." "I know who Pruitt is," Cole said. "Then you know what this document means." Cole looked at the timeline. "You've been building this for a while." "I've been building this since Sunday," Eleanor said. "With help." "Whose help?" "Jim Carey, Hank Bridger, Tom and Ada Summers. All of whom are on that list. All of whom had things done to their properties that follow the same pattern." She leaned forward. "Marshal Cole, Caldwell sent Caswell with that warrant the same day Thomas returned from Helena. The same day. The warrant was activated specifically to remove Thomas Walker before he could testify to what he heard at Harmon's spread. You know what that means." Cole turned his pen over in his hand. Once, twice. "It means," he said slowly, "that someone in Harmon County activated a dormant accusation on very short notice, which requires either a significant favor or a significant payment." "Yes," Eleanor said. "And you believe both came from Caldwell?" "I believe the timing makes any other explanation implausible," Eleanor said. "And I believe you're capable of reaching the same conclusion." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "You're asking me to hold Walker here," he said. "I'm asking you to delay transfer to Harmon County until a hearing can be convened. 1 week. Long enough for the 4 ranchers on that list to present their accounts formally for Thomas's testimony to be recorded, and for Helena to receive and begin reviewing that filing document." She held his gaze. "1 week, Marshal. If after a week you believe the Harmon warrant supersedes everything I've put in front of you, I won't fight it." Cole set down his pen. "I'm going to need to speak to Walker myself," he said. "Of course. And I'm going to send a wire to Helena this morning about that filing." "I've already drafted the letter," Eleanor said. "If you want to send your own that carries more weight." He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile. "You're ahead of me." "I've been working all night," Eleanor said. "I'd hope so." Cole stood up. "Come with me." Thomas was in the back cell, not chained. Cole ran a clean operation, but locked. He was sitting on the bench with his forearms on his knees and his head up, and when the door opened and he saw Eleanor come through behind Cole, something moved across his face. Fast relief, and something sharper than relief. The expression of a man who had been holding himself together by believing something would happen and has just had that belief confirmed. He stood up. "Mrs. Hayes is here," Cole said with dry understatement. "I see that," Thomas said. Cole unlocked the cell door and swung it open. "You've got 15 minutes. Then I have questions for you, Walker. You'll answer them straight." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. Cole left them. Thomas stepped out of the cell and Eleanor said, "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did Caswell?" "No," Thomas said again. "He was rough getting me on the horse, but nothing beyond that." He looked at her face. "You haven't slept." "I slept a little." She hadn't. "Are you sure you're—" "Eleanor." He said her name the way he did sometimes quietly with a completeness to it, like the name itself was what he meant to say. "I'm all right. Tell me what you've done." She told him. Fast and precise. Cole. The documents. Jim Carey. The Somers Bridger. The letter to Helena. The request to delay the transfer. When she finished, Thomas was looking at her with that expression she had learned, not quite wonder, not quite recognition, something between them. "You did all of that," he said, "since last night." "I had time to work," she said. "Eleanor, I've been in there trying to think through what options I had, and I got about 2 steps before I hit Caldwell's reach in this county." "Because you were thinking alone," she said. "That's the mistake. We stopped thinking alone 4 days ago, remember?" He looked at her. And then, without any warning, he put both arms around her and held her, and Eleanor Hayes, who had not let anyone hold her in 3 years, who had built walls and kept them, and lived behind them, with the particular dignity of a woman who handles her grief privately. Eleanor Hayes put her face against Thomas Walker's shoulder and stood very still and breathed. It lasted about 10 seconds. It was the most honest 10 seconds she had experienced since she stood at Daniel's grave. She stepped back, composed. "Cole needs to speak with you," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said. He was looking at her with something in his eyes that she was not prepared to look at directly right now because there was too much left to do. "Answer him straight," she said. "Everything. Don't qualify, don't soften. Just tell it exactly as it happened." "I know how to give testimony." "I know you do," she said. "I'm saying it because I need something to say." Thomas looked at her for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face very gently just once. "Go," he said quietly. "There's work to do." She went. Jim Carey arrived at Cole's office at 8:45, which was 10 minutes later than Eleanor had wanted but 15 minutes earlier than she'd expected, given that Dora's boy would have had to ride out and back. He came through the door and looked around and said, "Caldwell know you've called this meeting?" "Not yet," Eleanor said. "By noon he will." "Then we'd better move." Cole had arranged chairs in a row, not behind a desk, in a row, which told Eleanor something about how he wanted this framed. He sat in his own chair with a ledger open in front of him and a pen in his hand. And when all 4 ranchers were seated, Jim Carey, Hank Bridger, Tom and Ada Summers with Eleanor at the end, he looked around the group. "I'm going to take statements," Cole said, "from each of you about what has occurred on your properties in the last 2 years. I'm going to write what you tell me. I'm also going to wire Helena this morning about the acquisition document." He looked at Eleanor. "Walker's transfer to Harmon County is delayed pending review. He stays here." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." Cole's voice was dry. "Caldwell's going to hear about this before the ink is dry. Prepare for that." "We are," Eleanor said. Cole looked at Jim Carey first. "Mr. Carey, start from the beginning." Jim Carey straightened in his chair and began talking. How was precise, and he was angry, and he was 82 years old, and he had the particular authority of someone who has been somewhere long enough that every word he says carries the weight of that duration. He talked about the water right dispute about Pruitt's visits, about the way the dispute had been framed as a clerical error, when everyone who knew the original survey knew it was not a clerical error. He talked about his wife's kitchen garden and the creek, and the 30 years his family had run cattle on that land, and his voice did not waver, Cole wrote. Hank Bridger went next. Shorter, blunter, with the directness of a man who does not soften things by habit. He talked about a fencing dispute on his eastern boundary, about pressure from the bank that had coincided exactly with the dispute filing, about 2 offers from a land company he had eventually identified as connected to Caldwell through a shell structure, Cole wrote. Tom Summers talked about the creek boundary. Ada Summers added 3 specific dates unprompted that Tom had forgotten, with the precision of a woman who keeps records because she knows someone has to, Cole wrote. Then he looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes, he said. She told it from the beginning. The deed inquiry. What it had cost her in legal fees she didn't have. What Thomas had heard at Harmon's place. The way the warrant had been timed, activated the same day, Thomas came back from Helena with the acquisition document. She laid it out in the order she had spent the night organizing it, and she watched Cole's pen move, and she did not leave anything out. When she finished, Cole set down his pen. He looked at the 4 accounts in his ledger. He looked at the acquisition document. He sat very still for a moment, which Eleanor had learned was not hesitation, but calculation. The specific calculation of a fair man deciding what the evidence in front of him required him to do. "I'm going to write to the Harmon County Justice of the Peace," he said, requesting a full accounting of the basis for the warrant. If the accusation was never formally filed and has now been activated on short notice, without new evidence, there are grounds to contest it. He looked at Eleanor. "That takes time." "How much time?" "A week. Maybe 2. And in the meantime, Walker stays here, under my jurisdiction, not Harmon's." Cole closed his ledger. "And I'm going to have a conversation with Victor Caldwell." The room went still. Hank Bridger said, "You're going to tip him off. I'm going to give him the opportunity to respond to specific allegations before I escalate to the territorial office," Cole said evenly. "That's how legal process works. It's also how I find out how he responds when he's cornered. Cornered men make mistakes." He looked around the room. "I want all of you to stay in town today. I don't want any of you on isolated roads until I've had that conversation." Eleanor said, "When?" "This afternoon," Cole said. She nodded. "Then we wait." They waited in the Mill Haven Hotel dining room, because it was the largest interior space where all of them could sit together, and because Eleanor wanted them where she could see them. She ordered coffee for the table, and nobody said much for the first 30 minutes, while the reality of what they'd just done settled over them. Ada Summers reached across the table and touched Eleanor's hand. "You held this together," she said quietly. "You know that." "We held it together," Eleanor said. "You called us," Ada said. "You found the document. You spent the night writing what needed writing. You walked into Cole's office." Her voice was steady and warm and certain. "I've been watching men in this county try to take back what Caldwell took from them for 2 years. They went alone. They lost alone. You came to us." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Don't minimize that." Eleanor looked at the table. "I had Thomas," she said. "Yes?" Ada said. "You did. And I'd wager you know what that means better than you're letting on." Eleanor did not answer, but she did not pull her hand away. What happened next came faster than Eleanor had calculated for. At 2 in the afternoon. Cole's deputy came through the hotel door and spoke to Cole in a low voice at the bar, and Cole's face changed in a way that Eleanor had not seen it change all morning. Not surprise, not concern. The particular tightness of a man who has just received information that changes his understanding of the situation. He came to their table. "I need to speak with Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Now." They went to the corner of the room. "I sent a wire to Helena this morning," Cole said quietly. "About the acquisition filing. The response came back 20 minutes ago." He met Eleanor's eyes. "The filing was flagged 6 months ago by someone at the Territorial Land Office who noticed the shell company structure and believed it was being used to circumvent the land consolidation laws passed in 1882. He paused. "There's already an investigation. A federal one. It has been open for 6 months." Eleanor went very still. "The agent running it," Cole said, "has been waiting for someone in this county to come forward with direct evidence. Someone who could testify to the coercive methods directly, not just the paper trail." He looked at her. "They need Thomas Walker, Eleanor. Not for a county hearing. For a federal investigation." The word federal landed in the room between them and stayed there. Federal meant above Caldwell's reach. Federal meant the Harmon County warrant was a minor instrument in a much larger legal structure. Federal meant that Victor Caldwell, who had operated for years in the comfortable certainty that his resources exceeded the reach of any county official who might oppose him, had stepped over a line he didn't know existed. "How fast can we get a federal agent here?" Eleanor asked. "He's in Helena," Cole said. "Wire says he can be here in 4 days. Thomas stays here until then." "Under my protection," Cole said. "Yes." Eleanor breathed. There's more, Cole said. She looked at him. The federal investigation, he said, covers 5 counties, not one. The acquisition pattern we've been looking at 12 properties is the smallest part of it. Caldwell's been doing this across the territory for 3 years. Over 60 properties. Some of those families, the ones who sold, may be eligible for legal remedy. He paused. If the case holds together. 60 properties, not 12. Eleanor looked across the room at Jim Carey, who was sitting with his coffee cup in both hands, talking to Hank Bridger, with the focused attention of 2 men who have been through something together. At Ada and Tom Summers, whose hands were linked on the table between them. At the window beyond them, where the Millhaven Street went on normally in the afternoon light, people moving through it who did not know what was being assembled in this room. 60 families. 60 sets of people who had faced what she was facing, what Jim Carey was facing, what the Sommers were facing. Manufactured crises, financial pressure, legal instruments used as weapons, and had not had what Eleanor had. A document, a witness, each other. When Caldwell hears about the federal investigation, Eleanor said, he'll move, immediately, before the agent arrives. Yes, Cole said. He'll try to discredit Thomas. Or worse, Cole said quietly. Eleanor turned back to him sharply. Caldwell has operated this long because he's been careful, Cole said. But careful men, when they're cornered, sometimes stop being careful. I need Walker somewhere. Caldwell can't reach him for 4 days. Here, Eleanor said. Keep him here. Your jail is more protection right now than a free road. Cole nodded. That's my thinking. But you need to be careful too, Eleanor. You're the one who brought this together. Caldwell knows that. She met his eyes. I know. She went back to the table and spoke quietly to the group and told them what Cole had told her. Not all of it. Not the scope of 60 properties, not yet, because that was a weight she needed to place carefully. But the federal investigation. The 4 days. The need to stay quiet and stay close. Jim Carey listened and then said, Caldwell will be at his property tonight hearing about this. He's got enough men to know what happened here today before supper. Probably, Eleanor said. What are we doing about our own ranches? Tom Summers asked. We can't all stay in town for 4 days. Send word to your neighbors, Eleanor said. People you trust. Ask them to ride your fence lines. Keep eyes on your cattle. Don't leave anything vulnerable that Caldwell can use as a pressure point in the next 4 days. You think he'd go after our livestock, Ada said. I think I don't know what he'll do, Eleanor said. And that's the only honest answer. Tom Summers nodded slowly. Ada looked at her husband, then at Eleanor. What about your place? I'll ride back this evening, Eleanor said. I've got the children. I can't stay in town. I'll come with you, Hank Bridger said. I'll sleep in your barn for the next few days. Eleanor looked at him. I've got no family at home waiting, Bridger said. And you'll sleep better with another set of eyes on the property. He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. It ain't charity, it's practical. He said it the same way Eleanor had said it to Thomas weeks ago, standing in her kitchen. She recognized the shape of the argument, and she understood that she was being offered something she needed and should not refuse. Thank you, she said. I mean it. She went to see Thomas before she left. Cole let her in without comment. Thomas was sitting on the bench again, but different from the morning, less braced, more settled. He'd been told about the federal investigation. She could see it in the way he was holding himself. 4 days, she said. I know. He looked at her. Eleanor, this changes what you're walking into. If Caldwell decides the investigation is already lost and he needs to make things disappear before the agent arrives, Cole is watching for it. Cole has 1 deputy and a county full of Caldwell's people. He also has a federal wire and 4 days, Eleanor said. That's enough. Thomas stood up and came to the cell bars. He wrapped one hand around one of them, not gripping, just holding, and looked at her. I need to say something, he said. Thomas. Eleanor, let me say it. She stopped. I know this is not the time, he said. I know there are things moving that are bigger than one conversation in a jail cell. But I have been sitting in here thinking about you riding back to that ranch alone with my children, and I need you to hear this before you go." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever I had before I came to your gate, whatever life I thought I was going to build, it wasn't this. I didn't know what this was. I didn't know what you were." He stopped for a moment. "I'm not asking you anything right now. I don't have the right to ask you anything right now. But I need you to know that what I feel, what's happened in this ranch, and in this house, and at that kitchen table, it's real. For me, it's real." Eleanor looked at him. She looked at him for a long, still moment. "I know," she said quietly. "It's real for me too." She reached through the bars and put her hand over his on the bar and held it there for 3 seconds. Then she let go. "4 days," she said. "Stay safe." "You too," Thomas said. She left before she could find anything more to say that would cost her more than she could afford to spend right now. The ride back was quiet. Bridger rode beside her without talking, which she appreciated. The sun was lower, and the heat had backed off slightly, and the land spread out in every direction, with the particular emptiness that was not desolation, but was just Montana, wide and flat and honest about what it was. She was half a mile from the ranch when she saw it. Smoke. Not from the chimney. From the wrong direction. Behind the barn. Eleanor drove her heels in, and the bay surged forward, and she rode the last half-mile at full speed with Bridger behind her, and she was off the horse before it fully stopped running around the side of the barn to the equipment shed beyond. The shed was burning, or had been burning. Someone had put fire to the corner nearest the road. Deliberate, not accidental. She could see the pattern of it, but the fire had not caught as well as intended on the dry wood and had burned itself to char without jumping to the barn. She stood there breathing hard, looking at the scorched corner. Bridger came up beside her. He looked at it for a moment. "That's a message," he said quietly. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Caldwell, or one of his men." She looked at the road. No horses visible. Whoever had done it was gone. "He knows we went to Cole." "He's telling you what he'll do," Bridger said, "if you keep pushing." Eleanor looked at the charred wood, at the equipment shed that she and Thomas had repaired together 6 weeks ago, fitting the broken wheel mechanism back into usefulness with wire and stubbornness. At the blackened corner where someone had put a flame to what they had built. She felt something move through her that was not fear. It was the opposite of fear. "Go check on the horses," she said. "Make sure nothing else was touched." "Eleanor." "The horses first," she said. "Then we do a full check of the fence line." Bridger looked at her. Then he nodded and went. Eleanor stood in front of the burned corner for another moment. She thought of Thomas in a cell in Millhaven. She thought of Lucy sitting straight-backed on a cot saying, "Okay," like a decision. She thought of Benjamin saying like before, and trusting completely that she would make it so. She thought of 60 families. She turned around and walked to the horse trough and filled a bucket and doused the remaining char until she was certain nothing was smoldering. Then she went inside and wrote a wire for Cole. He needed to know tonight, and in the morning she would be ready for whatever Caldwell sent next, because this was her land, and she was not leaving it. The wire reached Cole before midnight. He sent a response before dawn, 2 words. "Understood. Watching." Eleanor slept 3 hours on the kitchen bench with her coat over her shoulders and the rifle on the table within reach. Hank Bridger took the first watch outside, then woke her at 4, and she took the second. And by the time gray light started at the window edges, they had both been up long enough that the exhaustion had moved past feeling into something like a second alertness, the kind that comes from necessity rather than rest. Lucy found her on the porch at first light. The girl came out barefoot with her hair loose and stood beside Eleanor without asking anything, which was very like her. Just present. Warm and small and deliberate in the way she placed herself. Eleanor put her arm around the girl's shoulders. Lucy leaned into her side. Neither of them spoke for a long minute. "Is Papa okay?" Lucy asked finally. "Yes," Eleanor said. "He's safe with Marshal Cole." "When does he come home?" "Home." The word sat in the morning air between them. Eleanor did not correct it. 4 days, she said. "Maybe sooner." Lucy nodded against her arm. Then, Mrs. Hayes, are you scared? Eleanor looked at the road. At the blackened corner of the equipment shed, she could just make out past the barn. At the land spreading out in every direction, hers in every direction, everything Daniel had believed in and everything she had refused to surrender. Yes, she said honestly. But scared and capable are not the same thing. You can be both at once. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Like when I carried the eggs the first time, she said. I was scared I'd drop them, but I didn't. Eleanor tightened her arm around the girl's shoulders. Exactly like that. The 4 days did not move quickly. They moved the way. Dangerous days always move in 2 speeds, simultaneously, both crawling and lurching, long stretches of ordinary work interrupted by moments that snapped everything into sharp focus. A strange horse on the Northwood that turned out to be a drifter moving through. A missing section of fence on the east line that Bridger found, cut clean, not broken cut, deliberately, which Eleanor wired to Cole immediately. A visit from Deputy Caswell on the second day alone, who rode up to the gate with a folded paper that turned out to be a second inquiry from the county land office, this one requesting Eleanor present herself at the Millhaven courthouse within 5 business days to respond to the deed dispute. Eleanor read it at the gate. She looked at Caswell. Tell whoever sent this, she said, that I am aware of the inquiry and I will be responding through my legal representative. She did not have a legal representative. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. Thank you for the ride out, Deputy. Caswell looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has been doing a thing long enough to be comfortable with it and has just felt for the first time a small discomfort. He touched his hat and rode away. Eleanor watched him go and thought about that expression. Filed it. On the 3rd day, Jim Carey rode out. He arrived at noon, tied his horse at the post, and came through the gate carrying a folded newspaper which he handed to Eleanor without a word. She opened it. It was the Millhaven Gazette, 2 days old. On the front page below the fold was a brief article. It used careful language, allegations, reported claims under investigation, but the substance was unmistakable. A federal investigation into land acquisition practices in Montana Territory. A named attorney Pruitt described as the central figure in a shell company structure. Victor Caldwell mentioned twice, both times as a connected party. Eleanor read it twice. Where did this come from? She said. Somebody in Helena leaked it, Jim said. Or somebody wanted it out. Either way, it's out. He looked at her. Caldwell knows it's out. His man Pruitt left Millhaven yesterday morning, packed up his office and went. Eleanor looked at the paper. Pruitt leaving was not reassurance. Pruitt leaving meant he was cutting his exposure, which meant the legal structure that Caldwell had been using was being hastily disassembled, which meant Caldwell himself was calculating what could be sacrificed, what needed to be protected, what could be reframed or denied, which meant the next 36 hours before the federal agent arrived were the most dangerous. Go back to your place, Eleanor said. Stay off the roads after dark. And Jim. She looked at him. Thank you, for all of it. Jim Carey picked up his hat. My wife built her garden on that creek, he said. I told you, that ain't something I walk away from. He put the hat on. You hold steady, Eleanor. Yes, sir, she said. He rode out. Bridger came to stand beside her. He read the article over her shoulder. Caldwell's not going to go quietly, he said. No, Eleanor said. He's not. She was right. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, a rider arrived at the gate. Not Caswell this time, not any county man she recognized. A young man, maybe 20, who held an envelope out and said he'd been paid to deliver it and had no other information. Eleanor took the envelope. She opened it at the kitchen table with Bridger standing across from her. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was precise and controlled, not Caldwell's, she suspected, but written to his dictation. It read, The matter of the Walker warrant can be resolved without further complication. The deed inquiry on the Hayes property can be withdrawn. In exchange, the parties currently engaged with federal authorities are asked to reconsider the accuracy of their accounts. Certain memories on reflection may prove less reliable than initially believed. This arrangement benefits everyone involved. Consider it carefully. Eleanor read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at Bridger. Bridger looked at it, then at her. "He's offering to back off," he said, "in exchange for you all withdrawing your testimony." "Yes." "That's he's scared," Bridger said. "A man who was winning doesn't offer to deal." "No," Eleanor said. "He doesn't." She picked up the letter, folded it precisely, and put it with the other documents in the cedar box. Then she sat down and wrote a wire to Cole. Letter received. Offer of withdrawal in exchange for testimony retraction. Keeping original. Will present to federal agent on arrival. She handed it to Bridger. "Take this to the wire office in Millhaven. Come straight back." Bridger took it. "You'll be all right here alone." "I'll have Lucy and a rifle," Eleanor said. "I'll manage." Bridger rode out. Eleanor sat in the quiet kitchen and listened to the ranch. She listened to Benjamin outside, talking to the gray mare through the stall door. She could hear his voice, but not the words, the steady murmur of a boy conducting a very serious conversation with a horse. She listened to Lucy in the back room, the small sounds of the girl moving around. She listened to the wind in the grass and the creak of the barn, and the thousand small sounds of a working ranch that was against all reasonable expectations still standing. She put both hands flat on the table. 3 years ago she had sat at this same table and made a decision: stay. And then 6 weeks ago she had opened a gate and made a second decision, smaller in appearance and larger in consequence. And then she had made 100 decisions after that. Thomas staying, writing to Jim Carrey, going to Cole, spending a night writing documents, each one building on the last, each one carrying the weight of everything that had come before. She was not done making decisions. But for this one moment in the quiet of the kitchen that was no longer hers alone, she let herself feel the shape of what had been built here. Not as accomplishment, just as fact. This kitchen, these sounds, the cedar box full of documents, Lucy's voice and Benjamin's and the gray mare and 4 ranchers sitting together at a table in Millhaven. Thomas's hand on the bar of a cell saying, it's real for me." She pressed her palms harder against the table. Then she got up and went to help Benjamin with the horses. The federal agent arrived on the morning of the 4th day. His name was Harrison, and he was younger than Eleanor expected, maybe 35, with a precise manner and very direct eyes. He came with a second man who did not speak, but wrote everything down in a leather ledger. Cole met them at the station and brought them to his office and sent word to Eleanor before 8 o'clock. She arrived with the cedar box under her arm and all 4 documents in order. Thomas was in the room when she came in. He was standing. Cole had let him out of the cell that morning, and when Eleanor came through the door, he looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has spent 4 days in a jail cell thinking about someone and is trying very hard not to show how much. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Are you all right?" she said. "Better now," he said. She set the cedar box on Cole's desk and turned to Harrison. "I assume Marshal Cole has briefed you on the structure of what we've put together." Harrison looked at her with those direct eyes. "He has. Mrs. Hayes, I want to start with the acquisition document." "Of course," she said. She opened the box. They worked for 3 hours. Harrison went through every document methodically. He asked Thomas to give his testimony twice, first in narrative form, then in answer to specific questions. He was not aggressive, and he was not warm. He was precise, which Eleanor respected more than either. When Thomas described the Harmon meeting Pruitt's proposal, the coercive threat about the 1873 filing, Harrison's pen stopped moving, and he looked up and said, "You heard that directly. Those specific words." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "And you're prepared to swear to it?" "Yes, sir." Harrison wrote for a moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. "The letter of offer you received yesterday." She put it on the desk. Harrison read it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. The particular settling of a man who has been building a case for 6 months and has just received the piece that finishes it. "A written offer to retract testimony," he said. "From a party under federal investigation." "Yes," Eleanor said. That's obstruction, Harrison said quietly. Not to her, to himself. Then he looked up. Mrs. Hayes, what you and these ranchers have assembled in 4 days with no legal training, no investigative resources, and an active attempt to intimidate you out of it is more than most people manage in 6 months. Eleanor said nothing. I need to meet with the other ranchers, Harrison said. And I need to send 2 wires to Helena. He stood. But I want you to understand what this means for the Walker warrant. With what's on this table, I can have that warrant suspended by tomorrow morning. The charges originated from a coerced false accusation that is now documented. No Harmon County justice is going to maintain it when the federal implication becomes clear. Thomas went very still. Eleanor said, "What about Caldwell?" Harrison looked at her steadily. "That's going to take more time. A federal proceeding doesn't move in days, but it will move." He paused. "And the properties. The ranchers who sold under pressure, some of those transactions can be legally contested. It won't be easy or fast, but it can be done." 60 families. "What do you need from us?" Eleanor said. "Patience," Harrison said. "And the testimony you've already prepared." He looked at the cedar box. "May I take this?" "It's a copy," Eleanor said. "I have the originals." Harrison looked at her. "I have a copy for you, a copy for Cole, and the originals in a location I'm not going to specify," Eleanor said. "I learned doing this that you don't keep everything in one place." Harrison's precise mouth did something that was almost a smile. "No," he said. "You don't. You." The warrant was suspended the following morning. Harrison's wire reached Harmon County before 9 o'clock, and Cole read the response aloud to Thomas with the particular satisfaction of a fair man who has just watched the weight of the law move in the right direction. Thomas walked out of Cole's office a free man. Eleanor was waiting at the gate of the marshal's office. He came through the door and stopped on the top step. She was standing below with the bay at her side and the morning light behind her, and her coat collar turned up against the early chill, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him, directly, without performance, with the particular attention of a woman who sees things as they are. Thomas came down the steps. He stopped in front of her. "It's done," he said. "The warrant is. The rest is going to take time." She handed him the bay's reins. "I thought you'd want to ride." Hy took the reins. His fingers brushed hers when he did. Neither of them moved their hands immediately. "The children," he said. "At the ranch," she said. "Bridger's there. They're fine." Thomas nodded. He looked at the street behind her at Millhaven going about its morning. Then he looked at her. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said. "I know. 4 days ago you could have, when Caswell came. You could have let them take me and dealt with your own fight. It would have been cleaner for you." "No," Eleanor said. "It wouldn't have been cleaner. It would have been smaller." She met his eyes. "I told you that night I stopped thinking about this as my fight and your fight the day you came back from Helena. It was one thing after that. I wasn't going to split it apart." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Eleanor," he said. "Thomas, I need to ask you something." He said it carefully, like a man who has been storing the question a long time and is finally sure enough to say it. "When this is settled, when Harrison's done what he needs to do and Caldwell's answered for what he's done, what do you want?" The question was simple and vast at the same time. What did she want? 3 years ago, the answer had been stay. Keep the land. Keep what Daniel built. Survive. Surviving she had done. She had done it so completely and so hard that she had almost forgotten it was supposed to be a means to something and not an end in itself. "I want the ranch," she said. "I want the north pasture water managed the way we planned. I want the fence line on the east side replaced properly, not patched." She paused. "I want Lucy to call me whatever she calls me and mean it. I want Benjamin to know that horse is not actually his, but to feel like it is anyway." She looked at Thomas. "And I want you to stop sleeping in the barn." Thomas was very still. "It's your ranch," Eleanor said. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm saying that the house has been full for 6 weeks, and I have learned in 6 weeks what it costs to have it empty. and I don't want to learn that again." Thomas stepped forward. He put both hands on either side of her face and looked at her with the straightforward intensity of a man who is not performing anything at all, and said, "Eleanor Hayes, I came to your gate with nothing but 2 hungry children and a broken name. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. I'm not leaving unless you ask me to." "I'm not asking you to," she said. He kissed her then in the middle of the Millhaven street in plain sight of anyone who cared to look, which included Martha Gaines, who was passing the mercantile and stopped so abruptly she nearly stepped off the boardwalk. Eleanor did not care about Martha Gaines. She had stopped caring about Martha Gaines some time ago. They rode back to the ranch together. The gate was open when they arrived. Bridger had seen them coming and opened it, and he came out to take the horses with the particular tact of a man who reads a situation correctly and removes himself from it without being asked. Benjamin came out of the barn at a dead run. He hit his father at full speed, which Thomas absorbed by catching him and swinging him up in one motion, and Benjamin's arms went around Thomas's neck, and he said into his father's shoulder, "I knew you were coming. I told Mrs. Hayes. I told her you always come back." Thomas held his son. His eyes were closed for a moment. "I always come back," he said. Then Benjamin pulled back and looked at his father's face with those serious brown eyes that missed nothing. "You and Mrs. Hayes are different," he announced. Thomas looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Benjamin. "Different how?" Benjamin thought about this with the focus of a boy who wants to get the description exactly right. "Like when the fence is fixed right," he said, "and not just patched." Eleanor pressed her lips together. Thomas's face broke open. Not a smile. Something more complete than a smile, and he pulled Benjamin back into his arms and looked at Eleanor over the boy's head with an expression that said everything and needed to say nothing else. Lucy came out of the house. She walked across the yard at her own pace, not running deliberate the way she did everything, and she walked straight to Eleanor and put both arms around Eleanor's waist and held on. Eleanor held her back. She held her completely, both arms, the way you hold something you are not planning to let go of. After a moment, Lucy said into Eleanor's coat, "I didn't drop the eggs this morning." Eleanor's throat tightened. "How many?" "6. "Good girl." Lucy stayed where she was for another moment. Then she said very quietly, very carefully, as if she had been deciding the word for a long time, "Mama." The word landed in the yard like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward in every direction. Eleanor closed her eyes. She pressed her hand against the back of Lucy's head and held the girl closer. "Yes," she said. "Just that. Yes, full and complete and unqualified." That evening, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, Eleanor Hayes did not eat alone. She sat at the kitchen table that had been the site of every hard decision and every late-night document and every early morning cup of coffee, and Thomas sat across from her, and Benjamin sat beside his father, eating everything on his plate, and some of what was on his father's, and Lucy sat beside Eleanor and helped pass the bread. Hank Bridger had gone home that afternoon with a handshake from Thomas and a jar of Eleanor's preserves that she pressed on him over his objection. Jim Carey had sent a short note, 2 lines typically Jim, that said, "Cole tells me it's moving. Good work, all of you." The Sommers had sent word that Ada was already talking to a lawyer about the creek boundary. 60 families. The process would be long and hard and uneven, and some of what had been lost might never come fully back. Eleanor knew that. Harrison had not promised easy. He had promised movement and fair law applied correctly, and accountability that reached high enough to matter. It was enough. It was more than they'd had a week ago. After supper, Thomas and Eleanor sat on the porch while the children settled inside. The night was warm. The stars were the way Montana stars are, excessive, almost unreasonable in their abundance, as if the sky was trying to make up for the harshness of everything below it. Thomas said, "What did Daniel say about this land when you first came here?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "He said it was hard and honest," she said. "He said he liked things that were both at the same time." Thomas nodded slowly. He was right. He usually was. She paused. "He would have liked you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I'd have liked him," he said. They sat in that particular silence that was not empty, but full of everything said and done and survived and decided, full of two people who had arrived at the same place from opposite directions and found when they got there that the place was large enough for all of them. After a while, Eleanor said, "The east fence, the full replacement. We'll need to start before the season turns." "Monday," Thomas said. "I'll look at the materials list." "And the well, the south well. Water table stabilizing. Another week and we'll know better. The north pasture cattle need moving back by the end of—" "Eleanor." He said her name gently, not stopping her, just bringing her back. She stopped. Howe was looking at her with that expression, the one she had learned and would never quite finish learning, the one that saw her completely and did not ask her to be smaller or quieter or less than she was. "Tomorrow," he said. "The fence will still need replacing tomorrow." She breathed. "Yes," she said. "It will." She let the night sit around them for a while without filling it. Above them the stars did their excessive, unreasonable Montana thing. Below them the ranch breathed in the dark horse's grass, the slow heartbeat of land that had been fought for and kept. Inside the house a small boy was already asleep with one arm under his head, and a 7-year-old girl who had stopped trusting the world was learning one unbroken egg at a time that some things could be held without being dropped. And on that porch, Eleanor Hayes, who had buried her husband and stayed, who had opened a gate on a summer evening when every sensible instinct said not to, who had spent a night writing documents by lamplight and ridden into a marshal's office and stood before her county and refused to be made small. Eleanor Hayes sat beside the man who had come to her gate with nothing and understood finally what she had built here. Not just a ranch, not just a family, a life that was chosen, deliberately, at every step, by a woman who knew that the bravest thing you can do after losing everything is to decide with full knowledge of what it costs to love something again. She had opened a door for one night, and what came through it was everything she had stopped letting herself want. Some doors, when you open them, change the shape of all the rooms behind you. And the woman who opens them is never the same person who reaches for the latch. Eleanor Hayes had reached. And the life on the other side of that gate was more than she had dared to imagine, more honest, more costly, more real, and more worth every hard-fought inch of it than anything she could have planned. She had given them shelter. They had given her back herself. And on a ranch in Montana, under a sky that did not care about grief or debt, or the small cruelties of powerful men, only about the land and the people willing to stay and work it. Eleanor Hayes finally, completely, and without apology, came home.